Okay, we are live. So for those listening at home, welcome to the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. My name is Kevin Madison, and I will be your friendly dungeon master or dungeon muser this evening. Tonight, I am going to be undertaking a bit of a daunting task, and I am going to attempt to provide an overview and some commentary on a classic of the role-playing genre, and that is, of course, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. But before I get into the particulars of this, I want to start with just a bit of a story. So when I first... Oh, my dog's very excited that I'm talking about AD&D. So when I first got into my own place, this is back when I was a much younger man, I did what a lot of young people do, and I went to IKEA, and I got myself a bunch of shit from there that was cheap and easily assemblable, and I could just do it myself, and that's what I used to sort of set up my first home. And I was not really I wasn't a car person, I wasn't a crafty person, so I didn't have any tools. So at the time, I picked up one of those orange boxes that has a bunch of everything you would need to assemble any IKEA furniture. And sure enough, it was incredibly helpful. When I got home, I found that I had all my crap in a pile, and I started assembling things. I did find that I had all the necessary bits and whatever that I needed to assemble everything. I had a screwdriver with a whole bunch of different bits in it. I had a wrench. I had pliers. And I was able to put together absolutely everything that I needed, so it was a terrific toolbox for that. However, it wasn't when I had to do any other kind of things like putting shelves up or things like that. And the one thing that was not in the toolbox was a hammer. I didn't have a hammer. I didn't really have the wherewithal to go and pick one up. So I just made use of the back end of this. It was a foam or rubber covered screwdriver, and I just used that to drive nails into the wall. As you might imagine, it did a less than optimal job. Didn't really do a good job of driving the nails in the wall, and it really kind of ruined the bottom of my screwdriver. The reason I mention that stuff is because the way I want to frame our discussion tonight is in the frame of a toolbox. I've been thinking a great deal about this particular topic and this particular overview for quite a while now. At the time of recording, it is March 19th, 2020. If you're listening to this long afterwards, this is right in the middle of the first week of the coronavirus quarantine in North America. So, which is the reason where I found the time to actually do this and force myself to give it some thought. But the thing is that at the time of recording, I've been running AD&D twice a week for about 4 months now. And I've been getting more and more people who've been coming on and commenting a lot of, including a lot of new subscribers, which I greatly appreciate. Hi, new subscribers. But what the commentary has been is, in a lot of cases, people are trying to correct what we're using as the rules. And I mean, for one, we use a lot of house rules in all of our games anyway. This is no difference. But there's a couple of things that people are saying, this is the way it worked, particularly critical hits. Critical hits came up again today. People saying, you don't use critical hits. Well, that's an optional rule. I'm not sure I would want. And the thing I have to keep pointing out is critical hits are an optional rule in AD&D 2nd Edition. It's just that so many people played with them that people's memories, are such that, and because critical hits have been a part of the game going forward after 2nd Edition, that everyone kind of thinks that they were always part of the game. Same thing with, the way that you rules as written use range combat is bonkers in AD&D 2nd. But the thing about AD&D 2nd that is a real departure from the 1st edition is that there's so many ways that it specifically calls out the options. It really makes it clear with a lot of the sidebars and a lot of the commentary how you're intended to kind of make the game the way you want. Proficiencies are one obvious part of that, although most games assume you're making use of non-weapon proficiencies at the very least, if not weapon proficiencies. And we're going to talk about all this stuff as we go through the review. But yeah, it's just what it meant was that because AD&D was so many different things to so many different people, as opposed to first edition, which is often treated with a lot more like reverence and that you should be running it rules as written. Then what it means is that you're not always talking about the same thing when people are talking about what their experience with AD&D second edition is, and I mean that causes a problem when you are looking for consistency. If what your goal is to have consistency of play. I know that some people who I've spoken to who, like me, grew up playing AD&D Second Edition. I didn't play an organized play. I've never played an organized play, so I've been fortunate to have friends to play with for my entire life. So I've been fortunate to not have to go into that that venue in order to just play the game. But what I understand from other people's experiences, having talked to them now, is that the lack of consistency with the rules was a real problem for some people. There was, that the way things worked at one table was not necessarily the way they worked at another table. And I can understand that being a bit of a frustration, but I guess the one thing we're going to find as we go through our discussion here is that I'm not sure that really has, it doesn't make for, say, suboptimal character choices the way that it does in, say, like Pathfinder. If you don't run Pathfinder the way the game is written, well, then there are decisions that characters will have made in the course of making their character that may be invalidated or have outcomes that are different from what they expected. Particularly if you're running Tax of Opportunity differently. And so forth. In AD&D, I mean, yes, there's going to be a different experience at the table, but it doesn't invalidate choices you've made as a character. It just means that it's a different game at different tables. Now, that sucks. I mean, it's unfortunate that people had that experience, but I'm not going to, one of the things that I guess maybe I've got my outline here, and maybe what I'll do is I'll talk about what we're going to talk, like the structure that our conversation is going to have. First off, I'm going to talk about my bias. So the bias of my perspective on this particular game. Obviously, it's a game I like. Regular viewers of the channel know that I don't like to make content where I just bitch about stuff. I like to, I like to talk about games that I like and that I enjoy, with a hope that other folks might, find other, reasons to enjoy those games as well. I'm going to talk about, at the outset, some boogeymen, because I think AD&D AD&D in general, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, has some boogeymen associated with it that people who have never played them maybe aren't, that's what their understanding of those earlier editions. So I'm hoping to provide a better idea of what the actual experience is with AD&D. I also want to, at that point, kind of talk about what expectations are with respect to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. But AD&D 2 as well is sort of the ugly stepchild of the old school games in a lot of ways, where it has not had a great deal of attention from the old school Renaissance community, partly because it's a little crunchier, and also as we'll go through the books, you'll see that there are some balancing problems with many of the products in the sense that they were not playtested or they weren't edited terribly well. So there is some stuff that the game itself, especially if you're taking the entire body of the game as something you're going to draw from to run your games, it has some balancing issues. So we're going to talk about that. Then what we'll do is we'll sort of slow things down and we'll take a look at the 3 core books. We'll take a look at the Player's Handbook. We're going to look at the Dungeon Master's Guide. And we're going to look at the Monstrous Manual. Now, either canny listeners who know their Dungeons and Dragons history, or folks of my age will know that hold on, that Monstrous Manual, that was not what was published in 1989 along with the DMG and the Player's Handbook. And to which I say, you are correct. What was originally published before this came out in 1993 was the Monstrous Compendium, which was a series of binders and then just loose pages. And it was one of the worst fucking products I've ever purchased. It was a terrible idea. It was basically a binder of monster sheets, and you would inevitably break them or lose them or rip them or whatever. So it was awful. It was replaced by the Monstrous Manual and then some monstrous, I think they're called Monstrous Compendiums, which were annuals added on, and we're going to talk about those. But we'll talk about in detail what's in these 3 books as well too. We're going in the context of that. Well, maybe what I'll do is I'll talk about that, then I'll talk about some of the expansion material that's available for it. I'll talk about the complete series, which has kits and so forth. I'm going to talk about the settings that came out for second edition. I'm going to talk about expansions as well too. Late in the game's life cycle, there was kind of a step towards what would become third edition in the Skills and Powers series. So I'm going to talk about those, and then I want to sort of do an overview. We're going to talk about who I think this game is for, who might enjoy this, and make some recommendations as well too. Now, as we go through, again, bearing in mind that this is a toolbox, so we're going to keep that in mind. What I'm going to say as we go through is I'm going to talk about some of the house rules that I have implemented for me and for my group, and I'll tell you why I did them. That way you can, it's not to say that that's the way you have to run the game by any means, it's that's what we're doing. And I will tell you that the house rules we're currently using are it's the fourth iteration. We've been continually sort of tweaking the rules as things have come up to make the game fit to the way we wanted it to play. One of the rules is substantially different. It substantially changes the way the game plays, but I'm going to talk about why that decision was made, and when we kind of, when it becomes sort of appropriate. So first, let's talk about background. I guess the other thing I should say is that if you are new to the channel or you're new to my reviews, this is going to be a long one. I anticipate it's going to be an hour or two. If this is not what you're looking for, if you want to find a more quick and punchy review of AD&D, do a search on YouTube. You'll probably find some much better, more concise things. But this is what we have on offer at the Old Dungeon Musings YouTube channel. So if you want a more thorough and comprehensive analysis, that's what we're going to dive into. That stuff it's like they say about the piece of string. Piece of string is as long as it needs to be. Same thing with this review. So without further delay, let's dive in first. The background for this. So this game came out in 1989 was when the first core rulebooks, the Player's Handbook, 2nd edition, the Dungeon Master's Guide, 2nd edition, and the Monstrous Compendium. These came out after 2 years of kind of compiling of, errata and changes that were made to the system to incorporate the skill system that was introduced in Wilderness Survival Guide, Dungeoneer Survival Guide, and the Oriental Adventures book to make that a core part of the game. Prior to that, in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you didn't have you had an optional rule for using secondary skills, but there was wasn't particularly clear how you're supposed to make use of that stuff in game. What the proficiencies did is it, to be honest, if you're familiar with modern editions of D&D, 3rd edition going forward, Pathfinder, 5th edition, whatever, you're going to recognize what the proficiency system is. It is a little more finicky than what the modern skill games are, and it is keyed to your attributes, as opposed to having an independent set of numbers that are going to continually go up as you gain levels. Your proficiency is keyed to one of your attributes. So, tracking, for instance, I think is keyed to your wisdom, I believe. So whatever your wisdom score is, you may have a modifier for that, and then that will tell you what your chances are on that. What that means is that depending on how your skills are, you could be pretty decently competent at your skills. But as you gained levels, you gained more non-weapon proficiencies, you could increase the chances with those. But what it meant is that there wasn't really they weren't pairing a lot of those non-weapon skills to the level. One of the things you're going to find as we go through this is that the vast majority of the game decouples, and this is true of AD&D as well, but because this AD&D first, AD&D second incorporates the proficiency as an assumed part of the game for pretty much all of its lifespan. For all the products that came out over the course of it, it is assumed as being part of that game, and what it means is it decouples from your level to a very, very large degree what a lot of the non-combat stuff entails. And you're going to find as we go through this as well too, things like reactions from NPCs and chances of doing basic things like swimming and climbing and stuff like that. Absent thief skills, they are largely separated from your level, and they are given a reasonable chance of success that is largely, in some cases, related to whatever's going on in the scene or whatever's going on in the story. And what that has a consequence of doing is that, your low level characters can often be fairly competent as well too, depending on your attributes and whatnot. But they're not the kind of, I'm never going to make this skill roll type characters that you see in third level going forward with low level characters. Fifth edition gets around this a little bit with the setting the difficulty classes a little lower and so forth. But what I'm going to try and do throughout this as well too is I really don't want this to be this is why AD&D second edition is the best game and why you should always run everything. The reason I mentioned that hammer story is not only because you need to know this is a toolbox, you also need to know when this is not the right choice for you. Regular viewers of the channel will know that I run a wide variety of different games for different purposes. Pathfinder 2nd is one of my favorites right now. I run some story games on here, Cult, Divinity Lost. I'm running City of Mist on another channel. I'm running Masks, the New Generation, for my son. I don't run 5th because I find that Pathfinder 2 is a better fit for my sensibilities. But the reason I mention those games is because as much as I really, really have loved running AD&D, and I love running AD&D, AD&D 2nd, it is not the game I'd use to run everything. It is not my go-to thing. So it is one of my tools in my DM's toolbox, but it is... and you can make it do a lot of different things, but you need to make this decision for yourself and your table and your players whether this is the right game for you to be running. So, with that proviso in mind, let's talk about my bias, I guess. So, like I said, the game came out in '89. I was one of the kids who did get, jumped in on it right away, and got my player's handbook, got my DMG, got my stupid oversized binder with all my monsters in it, and I loved it. This is the edition that I played quite a bit growing up, but on reflection, I never ran it properly. There's a lot of stuff that we just never bothered to make use of that I have gone back to, and we'll talk about that as we go through. But for me, there's a nostalgic appeal to this over first edition. I had all the books from first edition AD&D, but I thought this looked better. I thought that it was a slicker, it was a little more coherently presented. There was a little more... there was an effort to consolidate classes, for instance. Instead of having just all your different classes, they try to sort of fit them under certain categories. They introduced the Bard as a class for the first time, as an actual, it was a class in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, but it was a class you had to get into after leveling as like a fighter and a thief, and then you could go into this afterwards. It also introduced the, the idea of spheres of magic for different priests. So what you would recognize now as like domains in third edition going forward, or domains in fifth edition D&D, at this time it's spheres. So you're all the different, in the same way that there are schools of magic, in this one there were spheres of influence that the different gods had influence over. So knowing which deity you worshipped, that would give you access to certain kinds of spheres, some of them limited to like a certain level and some to unlimited capacity. There's a lot of commonalities that came forward with AD&D, the way that stat bonuses work, how they were different for each attribute, the way that there were sub mechanics and different mechanics for like random encounters, for for climbing, for swimming. We're going to talk about that when we go through the player's handbook, but there's a lot of different separate rules for everything, and which actually reminds me of a boogeyman thing I want to talk about. Separate rules. But for me, because I grew up with this, and because I grew up with THAC0 and a lot of other things, I kind of, I don't find them to be as challenging to deal with or to run as what it seems like some folks might, at least based on online commentary about it. The other thing that Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd tried to do is, in addition to the, kind of consolidating the classes, making the feats or proficiencies, a core part of the game. It also tried to make the game as modular as possible, and you'll see as we go through some of the materials just how much extra stuff is in there. Now that's, this is one of the things that I've seen a criticism of the edition, is that, because it was moving away from Gygax's, vision of what D&D was, that's a reason to fault it. And I don't think that's, I think it comes down to what you choose to, what your value is in terms of what you want out of the game. If you want a game that is going to be slavishly loyal and devoted, or a accurate representation of what Gary Gygax's game was, or what he says to run in first edition. This is not going to be the game for you. If what you're doing though is trying to find the right game for you and your table, which I think is what Gary wants to do anyway, or wanted to do anyway, then this is this is a little bit of a better starting point, because it already assumes modularity as opposed to having to house rule stuff from whole cloth. It gives you in a lot of different cases options for how to mix and match different things. For me, as I said, like, one of my biases is that I will house rule everything. I'm not sure there's any games that I run strictly as written. I will always make changes to fit my sensibility or fit the sensibility of our players. And this game is no different from that. So, my comments as we go through this too, my enthusiasm for it is with those house rules as well. Although I don't know, one of the things I'm assuming is that, and what the game assumes as well, is you're going to make the game your own. So if what you want to, if how you want to compare this game to other games that are available, or that you might have the opportunity to run, I'm not sure it's the correct way to say, well, this is the way it is written, and this is the way another game is written, and that's why this game is better. It's like, well, then just change the thing in AD&D. For me, the AD&D second edition is a better starting point for the specific style of play that I want out of my AD&D. What we're running right now is the Night Below campaign, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. But it is a terrific sandbox campaign, and it's so much fun. And the way, in particular, there's ways that the game allows me to just focus on the moment and on the story that's emerging as we're going through and playing, that I just absolutely adore. The game has robust mechanics and robust systems in place to kind of keep the rest of the game moving along. So things like, I don't have to pay attention to milestones. I don't have to pay attention to whatever. And that's what I'm looking for from this game. And I love that about this particular game. I can just play and have fun, and then players get XP. I award it the way the game says to do it. We've got a couple house rules that we use that are house rules suggested in there, but it's just a terrific game that I can trust that the mechanics are going to play out and give the experience that I want. So that's the bias I'm bringing into this. Is I thoroughly enjoy this edition. I prefer this to first edition. I prefer this to basic D&D, to some of the other types of D&D that are out there. It's not to say that I prefer this to other old school games or to every other old school game, but for going for that AD&D style of experience in an old school manner, I love this game. So that's the bias that I'm bringing into this particular assessment. Let's move on to some of the boogeymen that are in the game. So one of the things, and the biggest one, is THAC0. So what THAC0 is, if you are not familiar, is a acronym that is short for 2-hit armor class 0. And in the previous edition, what you would get is a matrix. You'd have a combat matrix. You'd find out what level your character was, what level the AC of the target, the armor class of the target is. And in AD&D first and second edition, they have descending armor class. So you, depending on the game, in AD&D second, you start at 10. If you're not wearing armor, it's 10, and then it goes down from there. The better your armor is, the more magical protection you have, the more it goes down. So, like, for instance, chainmail will give you an AC of 5. Leather gives you, I think it's an 8, and then your dex modifier will always apply. There's not the thing where you, if you're wearing too heavy of armor, you don't get your dex bonus anymore. That's not a thing in AD&D. At least not rules as written. And and then it goes down from there. So what you do is you look to see what armor class you're trying to hit. You check to see what your level is, and then that would tell you what number on the dice you needed to roll. On top of that, you then may have other modifiers from your stats, from circumstances, or from magical bonuses. You make those rolls, and then if you roll that number or higher, you hit the target. That's a lot of chart referencing. So what they did in second edition was carry over something they introduced in modules, in the adventure modules in AD&D, which was THAC0. And THAC0 was, you take the number that will tell you what number you need to hit 0. And then what you do is you subtract the armor class of your target. So starting, let's say, a 5th level warrior. 5th level fighter has a THAC0 of, let's see here, 5th level is 16. So it's a THAC0 of 16. I want to hit a target in chainmail. Chainmail is AC 5. Then what I do is I take 16, my THAC0, minus 5 is an 11. I need to roll an 11 or higher. So I'm going to roll my d20. I'm going to add my strength modifier. Hopefully I've got one because I'm a fighter. And maybe my weapon proficiency modifier, or weapon specialization, because fighters can specialize, and they're the only ones who can specialize in weapons. And I may also have a magical weapon if I'm really lucky. Or if you got a generous DM, what generous DM is going to give a +1 weapon by 5th level? Jeez. Actually, we might, but in any event, then you roll that, you compare it. If you rolled higher, you hit. I've done that since I was a kid, so it's something that's ingrained in me. But what I don't realize is that some people just have, the act of subtracting as opposed to adding is just, it causes a bit of a mental, like a jam, and it's not because they're stupid people. It's not because they're, not able to do it. It just, for whatever reason, it just causes a jam. One of my personal jams, not related to that, is when I'm thinking of the holiday Christmas, I will often refer to it as Halloween by accident. I don't know why I do that. That's just the way my brain is wired. And this is just a problem for some people. Also, descending armor class can be a challenge. If you've been playing from 3rd edition going forward, ascending AC is the thing you've always been used to. Roll a dice, and the fact that you're also adding to some things and subtracting from some other things, it can be confusing. I don't find it to be, and a lot of the players that we've played with, we have not found it to be challenging, but again, we grew up with it. When I had kid brain and was absorbing everything that was coming at me, I got that in there at that time. I'm not trying to approach it as an adult and trying to learn this really kind of backwards way of learning it. However, it is the easiest thing in the world to convert over to an ascending AC. So what you do is you just take, if you want to convert your game over to ascending AC in Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, take your THAC0 and subtract it from 20. That'll tell you what your plus to hit is. So that's what your class gives you as plus to hit. And for the targets, take the AC and subtract, take 20 and subtract the AC from it. That will tell you what number you need to roll to hit that thing. So, for instance, if I'm trying to hit a AC, again, instead of AC 5, what the AC will be is 20 minus 5 is 15. I need a 15 or higher to hit. If my fighter, who's a 5th level fighter, it's remember the THAC0 is 16, so it's 20 minus 16 is 4. I get +4 to hit. Look at that. I need to roll an 11 to hit. Same number. So it works out. I mean, if ascending AC is easier and it's just more intuitive, that is the way you do that. You can open up your monster book. You can open up your character sheets. On the character sheet, once it's recorded, you're not gonna need to think about it again. But it's just 20 minus whatever. That's what your ascending AC is. So I acknowledge that there are some people who struggle with THAC0. If you play online, though, one thing I'll mention is that Roll20, at least what we use to run our games, it has a character sheet that automates that tells you what AC you hit. So you don't even have to worry about that if you're playing online. But anyway, that's one thing you can change. Another thing is that it's a bastardized version of AD&D. I think I touched on that. It's, if what your goal is to play precisely the game as set out in AD&D First Edition, well, this is not that. So you're just not going to find that in this game. If what you want to do is run a good old school game with a level of complexity that is a little more than just the bog standard kind of AD&D stuff, where you're able to customize your character with proficiencies and maybe with kits if you're going to use that, and maybe you want to use out of the box a bunch of the settings we're going to talk about, the exotic settings that are available for AD&D Second Edition. Well, then that's why you would use this as opposed to AD&D First. So I think the idea that there's only one pure version of AD&D, and that because it isn't Gygax who designed this, it was Dave Zeb Cook who was the lead designer behind this. I don't care about that stuff. I mean, it is an unfortunate history of what happened with AD&D in general. I mean, with Arneson and with Gygax and the way TSR treated him as well. But I'm looking at this strictly from the perspective of a game. This is closer to what I want from my old school game. So yeah, so, and I'm going to, again, customize it anyway. Let's see here, expectations. So this is a big thing for players who are transitioning, particularly from more modern games. The modern expectation of Dungeons and Dragons is something that sort of dates back to around the time of second edition coming out. There's a time in around the time when the Dragonlance modules and the first Ravenloft module came out where Dungeons and Dragons changed its arc from being a game about kind of like modular adventures, which is partly why they were called modules, that you could just drag and drop into whatever games you wanted, where the adventure or the story emerges from playing through that stuff into something where the story is the thing you're passing through. You know, if you're playing adventure paths from Pathfinder, or some of the mega adventures for AD&D 5th, or any of the, to be honest, mega adventures and whatnot from the earlier, from 3rd and from 4th, you'll see that there's a transition at the early, either just before or into the time when AD&D 2nd came out, where it's moving more towards a story game. I don't mean a story game in the modern sense of like a Powered by the Apocalypse. I mean like a game that is primarily focused on telling stories about these heroes. You know, that is something that a lot of modern players really enjoy, and it's a great. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, it's not a either or. It is a different way of telling stories through emergent play as opposed to playing through a specific preset story arc. But one of the reasons why there is sometimes a bit of a disconnect between this particular game and that style of play is that the capabilities that you expect your character to have at first level are substantially less in this, at least as far as, like, you know, super cool powers. You do not get unlimited cantrips that do damage in AD&D. In fact, cantrips really are not a thing. You have a spell called cantrip, and for us, we use a custom or house rule where wizards can cast once per day the cantrip spell, which allows them to do magical shit for like an hour per level. And that doesn't take up one of their spell slots. But otherwise, you know, there's no like firebolt or things like that. That is definitely part of more modern D&D. It was introduced, I mean, cantrips were introduced in AD&D and Unearthed Arcana, but they cut them out completely because the version of cantrips that was in Unearthed Arcana are kind of crappy anyway. The version of cantrips that were introduced in 3rd edition, however, that's sort of what has colored the modern understanding, like what you see in Pathfinder 2nd edition and in D&D 5th, where your characters, like especially magical characters, are able to wing stuff, willy-nilly. That is not the that's not what your characters are like in this. Your characters, especially for wizards will have one spell per day, and depending on how your DM sets up you getting spells, it may be a shit spell that you've got to start with, and you may need to adventure for a bit to get more things. But the thing is, the expectation, if your expectation is that you're going to play a character who's going to be whipping off cool magic shit all the time starting at first level, this is not the game for you. That's not what you're going to get out of this game, you know. And if you could introduce house rules, I have house rules I use for another very similar game called Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers of Hyperborea, which is very similar to AD&D, where I do have more capable cantrips, not quite to the level of like 5th or PF2, but that's just not what you're going to get out of here. Similarly, your characters. There's a thing. This is a related boogeyman where the thought is, oh, this is so lethal in AD&D, and it can be. You know, I mean, the game can be, but what I think the game is that the risk of death is more prominent in this. Like if you run this rules as written, without any house rules, if you hit 0 hit points, you die. Full stop. There, it is an optional rule that I think everybody always used, which was to allow. It's called die at death's door, hovering at death's door. You don't die until you hit minus 10 hit points. You kind of like bleed out, and then you can be healed up or stabilized, so you don't die. But rules is written, you hit 0 and you die. In addition, the rules is written, you roll random hit points. There are different ways of structuring that. You can have people roll a couple of times. You can just give them max hit points at first level. You can take those modern approaches, which a lot of people did. I mean, when we ran it back in the day, we always gave first, max hit points at first level anyway. But the game it's less of, Questing Beast has a good video that talks about the difference between old school combat being combat as war, where like it's remorseless, there's no forgiving nature to it, it's not fair, and combat as sport. which is kind of how modern games are. The AD&D, or not AD&D, D&D 5th, Pathfinder, D&D 3rd, Pathfinder 2, those games they have a lot of space spent taking those games to set up so there's fair encounters. That's not the case here. But what that means is it cuts both ways too. And players who are really clever can have really amazing outcomes with their fights. And the game does definitely run the risk of your characters dying, but there are ways to mitigate that. And what that mitigation comes from is how you set your expectations, right? And this is, if you're running the game as written, you're rolling 3d6 down the line for your stats, and then and you roll your hit dice as well too. You might have a really character who's going to be a very a difficult challenge to keep alive, and may not be interesting, particularly if your dice betray you when you're rolling your stats. But that's not how I run it, and that's not how I think a lot of people run the game. There's lots of different ways you can take these, like I said, it's a tool set, and run a different game. So, the idea of it being a killer game, I think, sometimes takes the game to its extreme. And yeah, but that said, characters are a lot less, in contrast to characters like low-level player characters from these games. You have a lot less capabilities that you can just wing out. You also have a lot less. Healing resources as well too. Healing in this is way less than your expectations from modern games. So I guess that one is maybe a little bit true. And the last thing I'll mention too, a boogeyman, is the different specialized rules. So one of the things that the D20 system with the switch to 3rd edition really enshrined is the idea of one rule or like one dice for all, right? You use one dice to resolve all kinds of things. You use it to survive, and everything is rolling the dice and adding a number to it. So you're always adding, rolling the dice, roll it and add a number to hit. Rolling the dice, add a number to do skill checks. Same thing with skill saving throws, rather. That's no news for those of you who are coming to the game from 3rd edition forward. That's nothing new for you. That's not the case with this. There's a lot of different sub-mechanics that are in here. The way you handle swimming and climbing is with percentile rolls, and you have to kind of figure out what's going on with that. The way you get potentially lost is a separate game. It's not just a roll of a proficiency check or something like that. A proficiency check will have an effect on that, but it's its own separate thing as well too. And thief skills all have percentile as opposed to being attribute checks or things like that. And that's a source of, and I guess there's other things. Sometimes it's good to roll high, like when you're rolling attack rolls. Sometimes it's good to roll high or in saving throws as well. But it's good to roll low when you're making a proficiency check. And the criticism of that is that, it's so hard to learn. There's so many different things to keep track of. And that's fair enough. Depending on your level, that comes to a matter of taste. What is your level of comfort? Do you want to have it just to be all the same thing, which is fine, or do you want each type of thing to feel different? And that's the counter argument to that, is that if everything feels the same, then everything feels the same. If you have different mechanics behind the different tasks, well, then it will feel different when you are engaging with those mechanics. In addition, by decoupling some of the things from levels, it allows low-level characters to be a hell of a lot more competent at things right out of the gate than what they are in other games. For me, you'll see as we go through the climbing and swimming rules, that's something that in particular I love about this edition, is that I don't, there's not escalating skill numbers based on level for your swim checks and whatnot. That's not to say there's not situational modifiers for it. It just means that you can be good climber, good swimmer, whatever else out of the gate, because that's what, that fits more with that common sense things of my character's not going to be so incompetent and, whatever. After a childhood and early adulthood of training, I'm not going to be continually failing my skill checks to do the most rudimentary athletics things. I'm going to be competent at that shit. And that carries over to the proficiencies as well, too, because they're keyed to your attributes, and your attributes are usually like, well, on average 10 or 11. That means you got 50 or 55% chance before any situational modifiers to on average be successful with your skill challenges, which is, I think, again, if you're spent your lifetime training in this stuff, you should have a decent chance of succeeding with that shit. And it doesn't have to go up, like your craft check doesn't go up as on levels because you're a 6th level fighter and you hit harder and you take, have more hit points. That also means you're a better crafter. Like, it allows you to by decoupling that stuff and focusing the combat components on the level-based important stuff, like your saving throws, your hit points, different specializations and whatnot. It does a clever thing of just allowing you to have a little more realism and or simulationist realism, and then also have your cool combat stuff going up. And yeah, so I mean, again, like that comes down to a matter of taste. For me, I don't mind there being different rules for those things. It doesn't bother me. I don't need it to all be just one dice roll and then make my check. It also means that there are more mechanics that you can engage with as well, too. Like if you are playing with players who are of a more gamist kind of mentality, you can give them a clear... there's a clear reason for why they want to bring a rope along, or pythons, or whatever, like those things that they bring along. And I know that there are mechanical modifiers with some of those things in some of the modern games as well. But again, like because this is a flat number, it is a little more, it's not a +1 or a +2 by using those things. It gives a substantial chance of improving what is otherwise a fairly common sense number, a common sense chance of succeeding at those things. So yes, I mean, like the specialized rules, that's, again, I think probably just like the lethality, it's one of those things that fits to your expectations and your sensibilities. Now, this is not to say as well, too, one thing we'll say with all those together, going back to the expectations, this is not to say that your characters are going to feel disposable. There are old school games where your characters you generate a whole shit ton of them, like Dungeon Crawl Classics, and you're expected to see a bunch of them die at the end. You can absolutely get connected to your character and invest in your character in this, just like you can in any other game. And if you are embracing the dice roll mechanic to randomly roll your stats, that also gives that fun kind of, not quite the same, not nearly the same detail, but it's a fun, interesting thing that you experience when you go through a life path system with other games, like with Traveler or with Conan or with Infinity or any Cyberpunk. When you're going through and you meet your character as you go along, you sort of do that in the course of making your character in this, because you're rolling your stats, and depending on the selection your DM makes for how you're generating your stats, then it will be a different experience in terms of how powerful your characters are, but it still is an interesting, and how much flexibility you have with assigning your stats. If you can assign your stats anywhere, that's not quite the same as like, if you can only swap 2, that means that there's some interesting decisions that are made, and also some things that you are kind of, stuck with is not fair, but it makes for interesting developments where like, my wizard's a little stronger than I would have expected, or whatever. So it's a fun bit of that. And I guess the other thing this is not a boogeyman. This is just something I should maybe mention about AD&D in general. One thing that AD&D 2nd edition is not is balanced. It is not, there's all sorts of, because there's so many different options you can run with, as I said, like that can lead to suboptimal experiences if you're not getting the game that you expect to get at the table. Oh, you run critical hits this way. I didn't used to play with critical hits. Or, oh, you run, I don't know, no level caps for races. Well, I used to, have to run that. What this game requires is trust and collaboration between the player and the DM. And it's weird. I've played with friends and people I've met through games who have become friends for my entire life. I've been very fortunate in that sense. And I've never had to deal with, or at least very rarely had to deal with people where I need the rules to help me rein them in. To be honest, if I found that was the case, I just wouldn't play with them, and have done that in the past. But for this, because I know I can trust the people I play with, I don't, a lot of those problems of like lack of balance and whatever else, I'm not worried about that stuff. It's, in particular for a game like this, I can always throw in something that can kill people. I'm not really, there's never a point where I'm worried about, oh, this combo is because of blah, blah, blah. Like, there's never the assumption that things are going to be fair or balanced or a correct CR or whatever. So I have ultimate control over killing people in this game. I'm never feeling overmatched by them. But the level of trust the players put in me to play fairly and to make a fun, challenging, and engaging setting, and to select the rules. Like for me, we don't do a straw poll to see what the rules are. I dictate what the rules are going to be for our game. And then players create characters, and we may change things as we go and whatnot. But I'm the one who makes the choice. I don't do a straw poll like, do you want to use this optional role or that optional role? But if that's what your experience is at the table, and that's what you like and prefer, do it. You can absolutely do that with this game, but it does require that level of trust. If your style of play is a little more adversarial, or you feel you need the rules to be run as written to protect you from the DM in some even minor way, it's probably not going to be you probably might have difficulty with this game, because there are things that will seem unfair at times. But that's that is the game. I mean, you can still, I think once you set the rules as they are and stick by them, then you're fine. But it does, like I said, it does require a little more trust in this. And part of that is also trust that the DM knows what will break the game. Because especially when we get to the kit books and talk about that stuff, oh boy, like there are some really poorly thought through kits that are extremely broken. And if you are going to incorporate those rules, you do need to be mindful of okay, some of these are going to make for very, very different power level characters than what anyone else in the party is. So there's that. So that's sort of the outline, I guess, of the boogeyman and sort of some of the expectations and the requirements for this particular game. Let's take a look at the books here. So I guess first off, what is this game about? This game is about adventurers going on adventures. The rules in this, so it's very similar to other D&D games where you're going to be going on, it's a fantasy game. It has Tolkien-esque kind of assumptions to it, where there are elves and dwarves and halflings and gnomes and whatever. So it would be everything you recognize if you are familiar with a more modern edition of the game. The game also, depending on what optional rules that you include in it, it also can make for a different style of play. Again, second edition AD&D occupies this interesting area where it was transitioning from that modular, dungeon or site-based kind of adventures into this more story-based thing. And the reason that's important, I guess, to think about is because one of the ways that you used to gain XP, experience points in first edition AD&D, also came from gold and from treasure. And what that did is it provided a different way of rewarding success. You got some XP from killing monsters, and sometimes you might get XP from situational based like successes or RPing or getting goals. But the vast majority of it was from loot. You got magic items, you got gold, you got jewels, whatever. That stuff was what you got the loot for. And then depending on what your DM was setting up, you got that when you got it back to town. You could get it, whenever. So this game has, because it's moving more towards that story direction, for one thing, it makes getting XP from gold an optional thing. And it's an interesting consequence, because it depending on how you set up your campaign, that will have a substantial effect on what players' activities are incentivized. If you are going to maximize role-playing and like story-based goals and things like that, you need to make sure you are offsetting what they would be getting from gold with those kinds of big rewards. If you're only doling out what the game recommends of like 10 or 50 XP for good role-playing or good story-based achievements, it's going to be a long damn time before your characters are hitting second level. Whereas if you're giving XP for the gold, which is an optional role in second, it has the consequence of not only do the characters get a whole bunch of money, it gives that extra like, holy shit, I'm hitting the next level, thing with those kinds of rewards. And I really love seeing the players' responses to that. When players get to identify magic items, when they get to bring loot back and whatnot and get a big chunk of XP from that stuff, it makes finding that stuff even better. But that said, what also AD&D Second introduces in the Dungeon Master's Guide is the idea of class-based XP bonuses. This is expanded further in the Dark Sun setting a little bit, but what it basically is that depending on your class, you'll, on top of whatever general XP you're getting from everybody, or from everything, like killing monsters, and then whatever other thing your DM decides to give you XP for, you also get class-based stuff. So like fighters get extra XP from defeating adversaries. Wizards and clerics get XP from casting spells. Rogues get XP from sneaking and stuff like that. I guess, one thing I should mention as well is that there's a couple classes that are absent from this that were in AD&D that came back in third. They're in the Player's Handbook. There are no barbarians. There are no assassins. There are no monks. So those things all did get added to the game at different points, but they're not here to start with. So let's see here. What else? So the game is about, depending on, the reason I mentioned the XP stuff is because depending on what you choose to incentivize as the dungeon master, the thing you give them rewards for, that will largely dictate what your game's about. If your game is about achieving story-based goals, like say you're running a AD&D 2nd edition version of one of the, like say, I got it here at hand, Rise of the Runelords. Rise of the Runelords, and a lot of the is a Pathfinder 1st edition, adventure path. Many of these are set up to give you XP per encounter and whatnot, or to just set milestones for this. Well, if you're going to run something like this, where characters need to be at certain levels by certain points, then you might just want to just make sure you're doling out big chunks of XP for achieving story-based rewards, where they're not getting them from fighting stuff or from achieving loot. That would incentivize that style of play. If you're running more of a sandbox game and you're just letting things go where the players choose to go, then you incentivize with the gold. The more ancient ruins they bash their way into, the more dragon lairs they go to, the more things they bring back. That's what is going to maximize their chance of getting new levels. And you can also run a mix of the two. Like for me, in our current campaign, we run a mix of that stuff. There's characters get XP from role-playing based goals, from mission-based goals, from loot, from identifying magic items, and from their killing monsters, or defeating monsters at least, and from exploration, because I like incentivizing that too, and from, what's the other one? Oh, class-based, then the class-based thing. So it, you might think that, oh gosh, Kev, that sounds like an awful lot of XP. Well, my players are, we're 22 sessions in right now. On average, we play 3 hours per session, and the players have just hit 3rd level. So we're not, they're not racing up too quickly. But I mean, like, they are making real good progress in other ways. And that's maybe another thing to think about too. What the game's not about is specifically, or at least it isn't specifically about, interesting tactical encounters. Pathfinder 2 and D&D 5, a lot of the rules allow you a lot of leeway to run more, and I don't want to say video gamey in a bad way, I mean like set piece encounters. Because you're only having a certain amount of encounters per day, that's the only fair thing to do with those games. You can really take advantage of those crunchy tactical rules and how durable the characters are in comparison to AD&D 2nd characters to run really interesting set piece encounters. That's not really how AD&D works. You can run set piece things that just make sense in more of a simulationist context, like in Pathfinder 2nd or in AD&D or in D&D 5th, I would have to make use of some pretty substantial like minion rules or things, or low level adversaries to run something like a castle siege or something like that. I'd be having to break up all those encounters into smaller things. That is not the case in AD&D. AD&D or AD&D 1st or 2nd, to be honest. But for 2nd, which we're running, I can have 12 goblins, on in an encounter, and the characters will engage them in a different kind of way. But in a similar game that is very, very similar to AD&D 2nd, we've had encounters with upwards of like 50 adversaries, individual things we're tracking, and it's done in 3 hours at the most. So and you run the game and you interact with the game in a more simulationist way. It also runs a lot faster than those games because there's not quite as much time focused on that. So what it allows you to do is to run a more naturalistic kind of game. If you encounter a goblin warren, you're not entering into game mindset of like, well, the DM's not going to throw so many things at us that it's going to kill us. That's going to be mechanically unfair, that they'll slaughter us. That's sort of in the back of your mind in any of these modern games, that there is a point where you can call bullshit. That is not the case in AD&D. You can know that, shit, there's a line of 10 goblin archers who are going to be raining down arrows on us the whole way we're getting up there. Yeah, those goblin archers only have like 4 hit points or so. So like one good hit takes each of them out. But every time if we just run out in the open, we're going to get pincushioned by them. So what that does is incentivizes a different style of naturalistic play. They try and think of clever ways of getting around problems rather than facing them directly. So what that game becomes about is a little more of like outthinking and planning and stuff like that, more so than just okay combat, because that is just that's just not what this game is about. Is you can have extremely exciting and tactically deep combat encounters, but they are not constructed to be an artifice of the rules. I'm not like having X amount of minions or X amount of low level monsters and some boss monsters and stuff like that. Like it's just the drama and the tactical depth comes from common sense, sort of real, quote unquote real immersion. So that's the style of play you get out of this. It is a more, I find it to be more immersive, but it's a different, it's a different type of game. Core mechanics. In the core mechanics in this game are you're rolling 1d20 to resolve pretty much all tasks, with the exception of climbing and swimming. Those things are percentile, and those are based on a separate subset of rules. Because of how those work, you could, in theory, just you could swap them over to D20 roll if you really wanted to, but it would just be a flat D20 roll on a certain amount, because I think that all the modifiers are increments of 5 anyway, so you could switch it over. But like I said, for myself, I like the way that it runs, where it's a different dice, or we're engaging a different mechanic. So what do you play? You play just like in any more modern version of D&D. You play fighters, you play rogues or thieves, you play bards, you play wizards, specialty priests. You can play over the course of the game's lifespan as well too. It introduced a bunch of other classes. It reintroduced the assassin at one point and reintroduced the monk at a couple different points. It reintroduced, let's hear, a whole shit ton of specialty priests, so that the priest became like a massive a variety of different, depending on what god you follow, there were very, very different classes. You could have a thing called you could play paladins, you could play rangers, and then on top of that, you could also use what are called kits, introduced in a series called the Complete series. Complete Fighter, Complete Fighter's Handbook, Complete Ranger's Handbook, and so forth. And what kits are is very similar. If you're familiar with archetypes in Pathfinder First Edition, that's very much what they are. Is they take the core rules of your class and then they make some changes and give you some extra stuff. As I said, like there was problems with balancing between a lot of those kits, so you could not always just rely on running them out of the book without problem, but where there were clearly some ones that were better choices objectively than what other ones were, but with a firm hand, it can give a real cool way to distinguish characters from each other. So that's what you play in this, is the traditional kind of adventurers that you would see in any modern version of D&D. What do you do in the game? I think I've talked about a lot of that. You go out and you get in adventures. You go exploring in tombs. Any kind of adventure you could run in a modern D&D sense with the modern rule sets as written is the type of thing that you would play in this. You go out in groups of adventurers and you get in adventures. You get involved in stories. You go thwart dragons. You explore tombs. You do the Dungeons and Dragons stuff. That's the same stuff you do in the modern editions. One thing that it's not great for, which I think carries over to modern editions as well too, is solo play or small group play. Solo play or small group play do not work terribly well. Let me rephrase that. It's not that they don't work terribly well. It's that there are games that are much better at running a small party or a one-on-one, one-player, one-DM experience. That is not unique to Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition. I think it carries all the way up to Pathfinder and D&D 5th, or Pathfinder 2 and D&D 5th, but that is something that this game does not do terribly well. So let's talk about what's in the book. Now, you may notice that the books, if you are viewing this at a later point, and I have already sold you on the idea of taking a dive into AD&D 2nd Edition, you may be looking at those books and saying, Kev, the books that you're holding up here, I can't find these things on DriveThruRPG. What the hell are you talking about? Well, that's a good point. You cannot find these ones for print on demand or PDF, because these are the original printings of these things. This is what for up until 1995, I think, or 94, those were the books. And then in 94, they switched over to what I'm going to hold up. This is the one you can get on DriveThruRPG now. This is the anniversary edition that was released about 2 or 3 years ago, at the time when D&D Next was 5th. So D&D 5th came out in 2014. It would have been around 2013 that this stuff came out. The versions you may find on secondhand market have black covers. They got black borders, and then they have these pictures in that. This is what you can get from DriveThruRPG, though. This is the print-on-demand version. You can see it's got the same binding, and it's got the colors inside. Now, because I came in, I will tell you a thing about both of these different editions. This is what the interior of this edition looks like. It's got this pastel kind of art in it, and it's got these big white chunks of text. I really don't like the look of these. I think these are terrible. They're also really terribly laid out. They're a very hard manual to navigate through, but you can get, the monster manual and the Dungeon Master's Guide available. It has the same content as in the versions I'm going to be referring to here. Different page numbers, but it has all the same content. It's got different art inside, and the layout is I think, challenging. In addition to that, you can find a separate product which is free. So these things you do have to pay for if you're getting them legally. You also have to, if you can get the print on demand, it's pretty cool. There is another option for 2nd edition. That's this thing called For Gold and Glory. This is a compilation done by two guys who not only consolidated all of AD&D 2nd edition rules into one volume, they also went through and scoured all the Dragon magazines and the forums and whatever else too, and sort of cleaned up some of the rules and then presented them in a more modern context. You can get a PDF of this For Gold and Glory on DriveThruRPG for free. So if you want to see what the rules are like for AD&D 2nd for free, this is the way to go. Now, the downside, there's a couple things that I find the interior of this to be very beautiful, very navigable. It does incorporate a lot of classical art as a, as the way of filling up the art in the interior. And I've seen people react to that in a very positive way, and I've seen people react to that in a very negative way. So that's a thing. It's a completely aesthetic decision. I do find that even just the way that they present the spells in this is alphabetically as opposed to by level. There are a couple small things that they have incorporated in here that I think were design decisions. Like they've changed the name of proficiencies to skills. They have changed the way that certain weapon proficiency stuff works. But I like it. I like those decisions, and I actually have incorporated them into mine. But it's just something I'd mention if you are, again, looking for sort of a purist thing. But if you don't want to spend any money, but you really want to get a chance to take a look at AD&D 2nd Edition, For Gold and Glory is your best legal choice of getting it. It's a really awesome product. I use this as a reference all the time when I've got something where the rules as written for AD&D aren't quite clear on how something should play out. So that's it. So those are the other books, but I'm going to talk about what's in this. And just bear in mind that whatever I'm talking about as being in this is also in the current edition that's available on DriveThruRPG and also the For Gold and Glory. I got my copy of this from Noble Knight. Noble Knight Games is a U.S. Distributor that does... I don't have any sponsorship or any shit like that with them. I just find that they've got terrific selection. But Noble Knight Games, Century Box in Calgary, and Wayne's Books in North America are all really great sources to find out of print thing, apart from like eBay, great sources to find out of print stuff. So you can get some of these for relatively cheap, probably cheaper than your a copy of the 5th edition Player's Handbook, to be honest. So anyway, the what's in the book here. So it has one of my, it's one of the most iconic images of my childhood. It's a little troubling, I guess, in retrospect, but because it's a baby dragon that's been shit kicked by a ragtag group of heroes. But anyway, what the game has in it is, there's the usual character generation stuff. One thing where this differs from more modern versions of D&D is, of course, each of the different skills, each of the different attributes has a different table in it. So, like, this is, let's say, your strength table. You'll see there's different things. So there isn't a unified flat bonus that is applied to everything. Now, the downside to that means that you're not going to necessarily know off the top of your head if you've got a dex of 14 what the modifiers are. You will have to look at the book for that, but it does allow for more granularity. So you can have, like, for instance, the strength bonuses. You're often getting damage bonuses before you're getting to hit bonuses. So the issue with a lot of modern versions of D&D where a high strength adversary also has a really good chance to hit, that's decoupled from here, because that part, you may see that go up a little bit, but it's not as much as the actual hit. So you've got, the game sets out what the different attributes are. It then has rules for the different races. The races that you can play in the core rulebook are human, dwarf, elf, gnome, and halfling. There's also maximums for your different classes or different races as well too. So like you're limited to, whoops, is my hand in the way? Yep, there we go. Sorry. That's what for instance, a halfling. Halflings can't start with a Constitution? Wisdom. A wisdom higher than 17. So I'm trying to get my camera to focus here. Come on. I don't know what you're focusing on. Anyway. So you go deep and charm enchantments. You can also play a half-elf. And then there are your classes. Classes have ability score minimums. So, hold on. I'm skipping over creating your ability scores. So, rules is written. The default way of generating your stats, just like in a lot of modern versions of D&D, one version is rolling 3d6. That's the way you used to do it in AD&D. 3d6 flat down the line, and then that's your stats. The options that are given in here is also like 3d6 twice. Take the highest for each of your attributes. Roll 4d6, dropping the lowest. That's, of course, something familiar to anybody playing in modern versions of D&D who aren't using a point-buy system. And there's other ones. There's a point-buy system where you can assign stats, although it's really suboptimal. You get a really shit result from that one. It is clearly not what the designers wanted you to do. But in Dark Sun, they also introduced a new version, which is you roll 4d4 plus 4 for each of your stats. And that's the system I used for our current AD&D campaign, and I like that. And the reason I use that one is because, for one, I wanted the characters to have higher stats because I wanted them to be succeeding in their proficiency checks more often than not. Also, I want to be honest, as a psychological thing, the characters feel a little tougher. They got a little, they can feel they're good in a couple of areas, and that allows it, makes that first level a little easier to weather. And also with AD&D, in a lot of cases, with the exception of intelligence, you generally have to have a fairly high stat to actually start getting stat bonuses. It's not like modern editions where at 12 you start getting a stat bonus. You get, in like, for instance, in strength, I think it's 15, where, 16. 16 is when you finally get a damage adjustment to strength. So I don't really care, I don't mind if the characters have higher stats. That just makes them feel more credible. But I mean, again, there's a bunch of different ways you can generate those stats so you can make it fit the way you want. There are one change or one difference that is in this edition from others, is from more modern games, is high intelligence does not give you extra spells. Clerics get extra spells from high wisdom, and druids do, but not mages. And the reason being is because, and I guess it's maybe worth mentioning now as well. If you're coming into AD&D Second Edition and your only familiarity is with another version of D&D, it's easy to go like, well, that's stupid because that's not what I'm used to, and I don't like that. But I think that sometimes it's worth thinking of why it's that way. You know, why is that game set up? You know, was that game decision or that mechanical decision, why was that chosen to be incorporated as a rule? And the reason being, to me, my perspective on this is because clerics are expected to have always at least one heal spell in this. The only sources of healing really are a healing proficiency, which is tricky to get unless you're a priest. It's expensive to get as unless you're a priest. Or it is, spells and potions. So it's tricky to come by healing, which means that everyone's going to kind of expect priests to prepare at least one healing spell. So if you give them that extra spell, they have an opportunity to prepare something else. The pace of play as well. You know, I was talking about what the game is about too. I had a comment on a recent session of our AD&D campaign where someone had said, "Oh, this in my game I use the pay for training and the downtime for training. So like you have to take I can't remember what the cost is. It's like 100 per level per week for training. So like going from first level, second level costs you 100 GP, and you got to train for a week with someone who's a higher level fighter or whatever than you. When you hit second level, it's going to cost you 400 because it's 200 per level, and then I have incorporated ways of making that cheaper. The training rules are rules as written. It's optional in AD&D Second Edition, and the way that the rules are written in Second Edition are inconsistent with how much gold you would actually have on hand. So it's I've house ruled that. And maybe what I'll do as well too is, for sake of comparison, I will after this after the video stream, I will add a link and keep it there in perpetuity to the house rules I use. Just if you're interested in seeing what we've introduced as changes to the game, to consider if for yourself if you decide to go in. But one example of the training, someone had said, oh, if they incorporated that, then I'm so glad we didn't use that. But the thing is that what the training rules have enforced is that for what we've seen is time is actually passing in the campaign. Like there's calendar time that's going by. And in addition to that, the players who aren't training at the time, they're usually getting up to some other stuff. They're working in town, they're gathering rumors, they're whatever. Like because there is the necessity to engage in that training time, it leaves the opportunity to go and do other stuff. So we're finding that, since our campaign started, the characters, like I said, have gone up to third level at the most. And it's been about 3 months that have passed already, which is almost the same amount of time as in real life. And that's awesome, as compared to a lot of more modern games where unless you're intentionally adding that stuff in, players don't need time to heal. They don't need time to train or whatever. You're just like go constantly. And that creates that situation where, your characters go from 0 to hero in the span of a year, unless you're introducing some kind of intentional way of adding those gaps in. The Midgard setting for that Kobold Press puts out. They have some really neat ideas for how to incorporate that in the game. But yeah, it's a thing that I didn't think about, but the consequence of using those rules means that time is passing in a more credible and believable way, and I love that. I've never had a campaign where time has passed quite as at least as much time has passed over the course of our early levels of play. And other things I mentioned, like what made me think of that is in intelligence, there is a percentage chance to learn a spell. So when you can gain access to a spell, you have to actually roll, see whether you can learn that spell or not. Is it something you're actually going to be able to figure out? And the way I interpret that rule is that you can't, what do you call it? That's one source. If you fail that roll, that means you can't learn X spell or sleep or armor or whatever the hell it is from that particular source. And the consequence of that means is that the player gives an incentive to go and engage with the fiction, engage with the world, and try and find another way to find that. If they really want that spell, well then, I guess I'm going to travel to town and I'm going to have to go and do whatever. Now, if you're running a strictly story-based campaign, you need to find story ways to get that player to give another opportunity. But if you're playing an emergent play, then that's what drives the story. That's what becomes the story then, and that's awesome. I for myself, and again, this is a subjective thing, I love story or player-driven play, and that's what that kind of thing encourages. You know, it's a small thing, and seeing it in the instance is like, oh, this is bullshit, I can't learn this spell. I much prefer just, snap my fingers and learning the spell. But by incorporating that, it incentivizes the characters to engage with the fiction and figure out a different way of gaining access to that, and I love that. That is a very clever bit of design. So that is something that, again, like, I think that the way that you, the way to approach this stuff is rather than just hand waving and saying, I'm not using that, think of why they have it that way, and before you make your decision of dismissing it. Now, I hate the advice of like that some designers say, where run the game for X amount of times, and then if everyone agrees, make the change. Now, fuck that. Like, this is a role-playing game. We're not fucking putting a man on the moon here. Like, take it easy. Instead, what do you do is just, if you don't feel it's a right, think through why that's there and what the consequences are of it. If I would suggest give it a try, but if not, who cares? It's your game. But yeah, I mean, think about what those unintended consequences in the actual play are. And often you'll find that the reason that some of that stuff is in there is because it's what drives the characters. It's what motivates the characters beyond just kick down door, kill stuff, take loot, A final thing under charisma as well, too, you have specific modifiers for your loyalty base of henchmen and the reaction modifiers. Now, the way that AD&D second works as well is you use random, or your DM, depending on whether they're using it, random reactions. So you may, if say you come across a group of orcs or a group of gnolls or goblins or whatever, and the DM decides they're not automatically hostile, you may be able to have an opportunity to parlay with them. And this is where those high charisma characters really come in handy, because they can drive a much better reaction. Further, because the game is pretty dangerous, the second edition less so than first edition, but in second edition, hirelings. Hirelings are a big part of survivability in this game, especially for low levels. Hire people to be the porters or the shield bearers or whatever you want, or like the the fighters or frontline mercenaries, guys to help you survive those early levels, depending on the kind of game you're playing and depending on the size of group, I suppose, as well. We've been playing the last 4 months or 3 months, 4 months now, I guess, with a group of 8. So it's a pretty big group of players already. We don't have the need for hirelings, but that's one of the things that charisma does as well. And the thing with, because charisma is sort of a popular dump stat in earlier editions as well too, it really rings home to the player why a low charisma is shit if their hirelings are continually running away because they don't have any loyalty to the players, or if they're continually getting bad reactions. It's a good reason to have a higher, a higher charisma, and I like that. And then of course all of those attributes interact with the non-weapon proficiencies as well too. So the classes that are available in this one, just to go through one more time, is fighter, ranger, paladin, mage, illusionist or other specialty priest, wizard, clerics, druids, thieves, and bards. So those are in the core rulebook. The expands. Other products expand out the different types of classes you can play, as well as like specialty priests, but that's that. Excuse me. There are rules for, and technically the proficiency rules are optional, but most of the products assume you're using them, and I like them an awful lot. I think it's a really clever way of making, giving the characters an opportunity to give more backstory, and also to make their characters differ from other characters. Now, one criticism of incorporating a spell mechanic or a proficiency or skill mechanic is that by virtue of introducing things that characters are good at, it also means that there are things that other characters are either bad at or not able to do whatsoever. And yeah, that's true. But because of what the proficiencies are restricted to, it's fairly specific stuff like charioteering or gaming, hunting, mountaineering, navigation, blah blah blah, and you gain new proficiency as you go along. And if you're you gain extra proficiencies from intelligence score as well too. So if you've got a decent intelligence, you're going to have a pretty good set of proficiencies, and it also allows the players to specialize. To have things they're good at. In our campaign, we had 2 characters that were particularly good at knowing direction and at tracking, and they were both wizards. We didn't have a ranger in the party, so in the wilderness travel component of the game, those characters really had opportunities to shine, and the reason they did is because of their selections of proficiency. If you're familiar with and your group prefers games with lots of customization options like Pathfinder or D&D 3rd, 4th, 5th, it's a no-brainer to include the proficiencies as a way of allowing them to further specialize their characters. And if you're using the kit system, that also in many ways the proficiency rules interface with those in a lot of ways, where you're getting free proficiencies or certain things are cheaper. So if you want more granularity for designing the characters, which for myself, I enjoy that, I would strongly encourage using the proficiency system, the non-weapon proficiency. Sorry, I got a little tickle in my throat. Getting rid of that. Then we move on, and so the way that the entire this edition or this version has this blue text, and I understand some people don't like it. I love it. So I find it very easy to read, easy on the eyes, soothing blue, and the art in it is fantastic. It's a mix of stuff drawn from previous editions and stuff that was created specifically for that. Some of it's a little hit or miss. The ones that you can get on Drive-Thru RPG, to be honest, it's garbage. That's a very subjective thing. I really dislike the art in it. With the exception, there's a guy named Ken Frank who did a lot of art for that edition, and I like his stuff, but there's a lot of other art in there that I don't like. But that is such a subjective thing and has nothing to do with the actual rules. So, take that for what it's worth. Then you get your big list of weapons here as well and equipment. One way where AD&D 2nd edition differs from a lot of other OSR games and from modern games is that your weapons do different damage against different size targets. So against small creatures or medium creatures, they will do a certain amount of damage, and against large or larger creatures, there's a different one. And what that allows you to do is to model, certain weapons are just a lot more effective. Like I think a great sword or a 2-handed sword does 3d6 damage against large targets and 1d10 against normal sized targets. And as opposed to like a dagger, which does 1d4 against small or medium targets and 1d3 against large. So it's a little granularity thing, and this probably is my nostalgia kicking in, but I love that. I love that there are different, it's a neat little way of modeling differences in weapons that doesn't just rely on one's flat damage stat. I like that a lot. There's also a rule called speed factor. Now, speed factor is something that was, I think it was introduced in first, but it wasn't quite clear how you're supposed to actually use it. They do make clear rules for it in this, and it comes down to how you choose to use initiative in the game. Each action has a certain speed cost to it. If you're attacking, you use the weapon speed or the speed factor. If you use a spell, it's the casting time. And if you're using an action, it depends on what that action is. And sometimes it's left to the discretion of a DM. But what you do is if you're rolling individual initiative, which I don't do, but if you use individual initiative, you roll 1d10, you add the speed of your action, so that's your speed factor from your weapon, your casting time, or whatever else. That is your initiative score. Then the DM counts from low and counts up until you reach your number. So those big, heavy, slow great swords that have a speed factor of 10 will be acting well after the dagger, which has a speed factor of 2. Or probably, depending on the initiative roll. Your decks can modify that as well, and it depends on how you want to. The default rules are that you roll group initiative 1d10, and then everyone adds their weapon factor or speed of their action to that. And then you count up, or you can roll individually as an optional one. and you roll each round. That's a big difference from for a lot of modern players who are used to just cycling through. You roll initiative every round in AD&D. And you would think that really slows things down, but the rules we use are group initiative. So one person rolls initiative until they lose initiative in a round, then the dice roll passes to the next person. So it becomes this fun kind of thing where everyone's sitting around waiting to see what the player rolls, and then, cheers a high or a low roll and bemoans a high roll, but then we make a joke of passing the dice to the next person. And when we start each round, I make everyone in their mind decide what they're doing. Then I show them what I rolled. The guy or girl who is rolling initiative makes their roll, and then they know whether they've gone before or after the bad guys. And then I tell the players, this is when my first action is. And because we play in Roll20, I have the guys put in what their weapon speeds are. If you're in person, what you could do is use cards, or you could just have them, you'd count up at like an auction. But it's pretty cool. Like, I mean, I like that a lot. I like the flow, the sort of erratic flow of combat that comes from rolling combat each round, and I like the way that speed factor reinforces the speed of weapons, the heft of those weapons. It feels like you should be able to move with a dagger faster than you should with a two-handed sword. So it's a nice little small way that the mechanics reinforce the fiction. It's something that I never played with as a kid. We've been playing for 4 months now. I don't find it slows the game at all. I'm completely, everyone, instead of adding their initiative score, they're just adding their thing. And because the rounds go so quickly in AD&D, you're not really, you're not suffering because you're having to do that math every round. But anyway, so that's another substantial difference. Then we have the equipment, which is what you would expect from a Dungeons and Dragons game. We get up to another optional rule, Encumbrance. Encumbrance is optional in the game, so if you don't want to have to track that crap, you do not have to. If you do want to track it, you've got some pretty comprehensive rules. And one interesting thing is many of the rules that have made their way into second are basically consolidations of rules that came from earlier supplements, like the Wilderness Survival Guide, Dungeoneer Survival Guide, and so forth. These are where are they? There we go. Just because the Wilderness Survival Guide is one of my favorite products of all time, so yeah, it's incorporated into there. I still make use of that as well, but most of the rules that were in there, including like distance you can see in different conditions, all that stuff is into your player's handbook. One change as well, a lot of combat rules made their way into here in this edition. So in the previous edition, the combat rules were in the DMG. Player's handbook in second edition, they have been transferred into here. Next up is your combat. Now, rules as written in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st and 2nd edition, the round lasts 1 minute, which is... I didn't like that when I was a kid. I still don't like that. It feels like a crazy length of time. You lose nothing. What we do for ours, each round is 10 seconds. Each turn is still 10 minutes. So they have different units of time. There is a round, which is in rules as written is 1 minute. I changed to 10 seconds. Turn is 10 minutes, and yeah, that's I have not found any anything lost or anything strange about changing that rule. That is one thing about the length of time that I've always found crazy, because I mean maybe it's realistic, but I just. The idea of abstracting a minute's worth of combat just doesn't feel... it's not the experience I want at the table, and it's so different from a lot of modern games. So it's something that is certainly different from modern games, but again, like, it's super easy to change over. You don't ruin the balancing of any spells or things like that, so you don't need to worry about that stuff. You have your combat modifiers, which is a fairly small list, and it should be recognizable. There it is. For any modern player, like if you're on higher ground, you get a bonus to hit. The defender's invisible if they're sleeping. Missile fire at different ranges. There's optional rules for modeling different types of weapon damage against different types of armor. I wouldn't use this just because it's so fiddly, and it doesn't add all that much to the experience at the table. But your mileage may vary. It's there if you want it. Again, one substantial difference in this game is the way that missile weapons work in the default rules. So the default rules is if you're firing into melee, then what you do is you figure out how many targets there may be in there, and then you figure out what their size are, and then you sort of prorate around on that. So like, let's say you got 3 allies who are all medium size fighting 1 ogre who is large size. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you'd roll like 1d10 divided by 2, or 1d5 if you're rolling online, and that would tell you what target you hit. You can take a pretty substantial penalty. It's like -8 or something to not take that, to not hit an ally by accident. And it's not that you automatically hit. Like you make your attack roll, then you make your see what target you would hit in there, and yeah, and then you yeah, you see whether you if you're going to hit an ally, you compare that to their armor class and see if you would have hit them. That's way too fiddly, and it really makes missile fire very challenging in the game because it's like you can only really effectively make missile attacks against targets when they're not engaging with anybody, and that probably is very, very realistic. But it's not terribly cinematic, and it's not consistent with the experience with a lot of other games. So what we house rule is -3 to hit when you're firing into melee, and you also, on a roll of 1, 2, 3, you hit an ally. You don't have to roll again, you automatically hit them, and then you roll damage against them. That's that. One thing that's unusual as well is the rate of fire for missile weapons is a lot faster. Bows can generally fire twice per round, and the way that you stagger your multiple attacks, if they're coming from the same source, like when you specialize as a fighter, you will get multiple attacks per round. You know, sometimes it's like 1 on one round, 2 on the next round. And the way you do that is if it's coming from the same source, you make 1 attack with that. Everyone goes through all their attacks, and then you go back to the start. But if you're attacking with multiple things, so like a guy wielding 2 axes, we got a dual-wielding axe dwarf in our campaign, they get to make boom, boom, both of them on their first when their initiative comes up. Then everyone else gets a pass, and then if they got a second attack, boom, boom, they go again. That's awesome. I mean, it makes missile fire is super deadly in this. It doesn't make it unbalancing, I don't feel, because the damage is not particularly big, and you don't, unless you've got a composite longbow, you're not adding your damage to that. But yeah, it makes missile it makes the archers quite effective, and yeah. It's pretty cool. It makes archer characters pretty good, but that -3 to hit and then the chance of hitting an ally, that definitely is a good way of offsetting that. You can use specialization in our house rules in order to offset that, to effectively, like, you know, get rid of the what's the precise shot feat in like 3rd edition and going forward. But yeah, there's that. There are then rules for punching and wrestling. And they're not terrible. Those rules aren't awful, but there is a product by a guy named Doug Cole, who I think is pretty awesome and a pretty great designer. He has a thing called Dungeon Grappling that I use for it because it's a set of rules specifically designed to make grappling and unarmed combat as badass in D&D and other games as it is as like any other kind of combat. So that is, but the rules that are in here, they are just fine. You know, they're perfectly functional. There's rules for dual wielding in here as well too, which are very easy. Basically, like you're going to want to have a higher dex if you're going to use 2 weapons, and then you're going to want a smaller weapon as well, low weapon speed weapon for it. There's rules for taking cover. There's rules for your saving throws. Unlike modern versions, there's not just 3 saving throws. You have, or in 5th edition, I guess, based on each of your stats, there are 5 saving throws in this: paralyzation, poison, or death magic, rod, staff, or wand, petrification or polymorph, breath weapon, and spell. And then what your starting levels are for each of those, or numbers, is based on your class, and then it can be modified by certain stats as well, or by your race. Dwarves, for instance, are very resistant to magic. So yeah, so that's that. There is a chart then for turning undead. Priests can turn undead, and it's I'm trying to think. It'll be a very different experience if you're used to like channeling energy in the modern versions of D&D. I can't remember if that's how you did it in third, but I know in Pathfinder you can it's like channeling energy to either heal in a burst or whatever. But yeah, so turn undead is in here and command undead. Then there's rules in combat for the nastier things like falling and energy drain, paralysis, poison. And then you get into the encounters, like what happens when you get into encounters. The surprise roll is something that, in modern games is not there. Surprise and initiative in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons second is always with 2D, with a D10. So you're rolling a D10. And with surprise, you want to roll high. With initiative, you want to roll low. So it's another one of those things where kind of goes back and forth. It kind of makes it funny at the table because, players will roll for surprise and they'll roll really low and then they'll yell at their dice for like, that was for initiative. What are you doing? But yeah, anyway, and surprise is not as punishing in this as it is in other things. In particular, you cannot cast magic during a surprise round. Whether someone is surprised or both parties are surprised will dictate the range at which a encounter starts. So there's, and that will also be determined by the terrain that you're in. So I like that it also, if you just suddenly stumble upon each other, then you're going to be very, very close. Whereas if you're not surprised and you're first encountering in, the plains, you may be 250 or 300 feet away from each other at first. So it feels a little more naturalistic. And it's not trying to fit you into a battle grid the way that I think some more modern games might require you to do, or at least the tactical mechanics would assume you would do. Then let's see, what else is in here? Visibility ranges are in the player's handbook as well for different conditions. And some of this, like, you're not going to have to memorize this stuff. This is stuff you can look up when you need it. But I love that it's there. I love that you can, I don't have to make it up myself. I can look and be like, oh, okay, cool. So in, let's see here. If at a moderate fog, I can spot someone at 50 yards. So that tells me as a DM how far away that fog bank, that encounter is going to be happening. Movement rates are set up in here as well, too. So you got your rules for moving. Attacks of opportunity are a thing in this. If you move away, I don't think they're expressly called that, but if you are familiar with attacks of opportunity from 3rd edition going forward, you'll recognize that as well. Spell interruption is way more punishing in this than in previous editions. Or in more modern editions as well. If you are casting a spell and someone tags you with damage, you lose that spell. So, yeah, that is a lot more punishing, but spells themselves are often a lot more powerful in this than they are in modern versions, especially sleep. Sleep at low levels is bonkers. You can that can like win an encounter flat out. And that might seem like cheese, but again, remember that the idea in this version of the game is for naturalistic encounters, not set-piece encounters. So you're not like, oh, I spent all that time building that encounter. It's like, no, maybe they put to sleep 7 goblins and they snuck up and slit all their throats. Well, that's great. They got 7 goblins out of the way. There's still a warren full of 40 more, and they got to, deal with that stuff. So, and combat is not, in this game, it is not an end. Combat is an end in Pathfinder 2 and in D&D 5th in the sense that the combat systems are very tactical and very fun. There's lots of tactical options you have, more so with Pathfinder 2. Pathfinder 2 is a little closer to what D&D 4th is, but there's a lot more tactical options you have in that. It's an end in of itself. It's a fun game. It's a fun part of the game. Combat's fun in this, but it is not an end. There is some other goal that you're trying to achieve that whatever you're fighting is getting in the way of. Be it the freeing, some prisoners or getting some loot or rooting out this warren of evil monsters that is causing problems for your local lord or whatever. And like, that's not to say that that those other broader goals are not there in other games as well. In like D&D 5th or in Pathfinder 2. It's just that because those combat systems are more robust and more forgiving for players and allows you to recover from them a lot faster, they are ends still in and of themselves. It's a fun combat system to engage with. So I mean, it's not absolutes, and I don't want to say that one, again, is better than the other. It's what tool do you need for your experience. What I like is that it's fast-paced for AD&D second, fast-paced, exciting, and allows you to be tactical in a common sense kind of way. Now, then the next is the climbing rules, and the climbing rules, as I said, is something I just love because it's disconnected from levels. An unskilled climber has at base a 40% chance, but if they have a rope that's lowered down to them, that then adds 55% to it. So absent any other factors, you got 95% chance of getting up that wall, no problem. You also have, there's modifiers from different races and so forth, but all of this stuff relates to situational, and the starting point for calculating your climb rates is based on your class. Or, based on your class and your training. If you have mountaineering, you get 40 plus 10% per each proficiency slot. If you are a thief, you use your climb walls chance, and climb walls is always higher than 40%. So thieves will always be better at this than anyone else, and thieves also have an opportunity to try and climb walls that most other people do not. And it may seem like that's just it's a sort of stupid thing to focus on, but it's one of those things that I feel because of the way it's set up, again, like at low levels, players can engage with all of this stuff. Getting a rope up to the higher location is important at that low level. What that means is that like in a recent session for us, what our players did is figured a way to climb up this sheer wall, this 80-foot wall leading up to the top where this goblin fortress was. And they made I can't remember if it was one of the thieves who went up or one of the wizards cast spider climb, and then the character went up. But regardless of whichever one it was just amazing that it made the players their ability really useful in that moment, and it made getting that rope up there mechanically useful. Players could make a judgment call based on whether they wanted to risk going up that thing or not. Climbing also is not falling. Like in these rules, if you fail your climb check, it just means you're not able to progress, and you need to find different circumstances in order to try and get yourself up there. Maybe it's because you're, a little gnome and you can't reach where your next handhold is. So you're going to have to change circumstances. Maybe use pythons. Maybe get someone else who's bigger up there with a rope. Whatever, take some of your armor off. Maybe you're wearing too much shit and you need to try and, clamber up there. And those are all the different situational modifiers that can go into that. You're not going to look at this every day, like this is not something that's going to come up in every session. But I like that, and I like having a separate set of rules for this, and that, again, it's disconnected from your level. Swimming works very much the same way. And swimming is even a little more left to the interpretation, where it just says, talk to your players. Does it make sense that the character would know how to swim? If so, this is what your starting rate is. If not, and there is a proficiency system, so if you do want to invest in that automatically means you swim and gives you an improved chance. But I like that little bit of common sense stuff is like, well, my character grew up on the coast. I've incorporated that as my backstory. He's probably going to know how to swim, even though I didn't invest in a swimming proficiency. And also that means that, well, because I didn't invest that player resource, it means I'm not going to be as good as what the other players are. And then you get the modifiers of wearing shit. If you're wearing metal armor, full stop, you sink. I love that about this one. No talking about whether you can make your spell check. No trying to roll 20 and doing your backstroke and your plate mail armor. If you're wearing metal armor, you sink. Full stop. So take that shit off if you're fighting on a boat. Then we get into the spells, and there's a pretty good selection of spells as well for each of the characters. There's the wizard spells, and there is then the priest spells, and the only thing, like a lot of old school games, it organizes the description of spells by level. So you'll have level 7, and then you'll have all your level 7 spells, and then level 8, and all your level 8 spells. That can mean finding specific references to spells is a bit of a pain in the ass sometimes, unless you've memorized or you know where the different spells are. But that's where the free PDF of Golden Glory can be very handy, because it has it in alphabetical order and has reproduced rules. That's what's in the player's handbook. The DMG, we're going to go through a little faster here. DMG has a lot more of the optional rules for how you want to, optional ways of creating your different character stats. It's got NPC traits and stuff. It reproduces a couple more. Well, it deals with a couple more combat situations. Tells you what spellbook capacities are. Some of the nitty gritty stuff that you will need to make judgment calls on. It introduces item saving throws rather than having hit points the way it does in modern things. You sort of abstract what the stuff is made of, and then items can make saving throws. But it's assumed if your character is carrying shit and you get washed with dragon fire, you may have to make item saving throws for a lot of that stuff, so your scrolls may go up. And at blush that may say, well, Kev, that's bullshit, that's just unfair to the players. Well, no, for one, I feel like it is intuitive that's what might happen. It's silly in modern editions where your equipment is effectively invulnerable to any area damage. But also it also incentivizes clever character play. Maybe they're going to seal their scrolls inside some kind of, fire-treated leather to try and protect them. Okay, cool. But it also means it'll be slower for them to get them out and cast them. So, anything that gives a risk-reward element or a managing resources element of decision-making to the players is something I'm always in favor of. There's talking here about customizing your setting as well too. Like I said, I'm gonna kind of flip through to the stuff that I use a lot. Morale. So morale is something that is not. It's either not in modern games or it is at best just dealt with by lip service. It's morale in older games is something that tracks the willingness to continue fighting from other adversaries, and it is a very, very key component of old school play because it means that every fight doesn't last until the very end. There are a number of different factors that can trigger morale checks, like losing a leader, like losing half their number, like seeing incredibly destructive magic for the first time. And it doesn't mean that the adversaries automatically flee. It means that there's a chance that they might flee, and then the chance is modified by situation as well. What this does is it allows the players to potentially, if they know that goblins are cowardly bunches, well, yeah, which they are. Goblins have very, very low morale. It allows the players to adopt tactics where they can defeat much larger groups than they would have to kill right to the end, right? Like, you can have groups of 20 goblins, but if the players trigger a morale check once they hit half, they're really only dropping 10. And if they happen to be at a level where they can use widely destructive magic or have magic items that can do that, same thing too. It's very it's a very cool way of making for a dynamic and unexpected state of play, and that's where the reaction comes in as well too. With a lot of non-intelligent creatures, what I'll often do is I will roll randomly to see what their disposition is, and then I'll roll a reaction. And I've had some times where, a random encounters happened at night, and it turns out that the thing didn't want to attack. They saw a big camp. They're like, nope, fuck that. That seems like more trouble than it's worth. We'll move on. Or they've encountered something, like a rust monster, and the players are kind of like, okay. And it adds this interesting dynamic element to each of the things that reinforces the idea that, look, you don't have to fight your way through every encounter. You can trick your way through, or you can bluff your way through, or talk your way through, or whatever. Sometimes you're going to have to scrap down, but even then, it doesn't mean it's going right to the bitter end. With undead, yeah, for sure, or things that have high morale scores, sure. But with certain other things, it adds a bit of not only verisimilitude, but also it adds a bit of a randomness to it, where or credibility, I guess, to the setting too. When some of the groups, you're fighting a massive village of ogres, and half of them go running off when you've destroyed a good chunk of them in one area. That's pretty cool. So morale is in here too. Your rules for poison, some of the other situational things like raising the dead. There are optional rules for things like aerial combat in here. Optional rules for encounters as well too. Random encounters, are not necessarily the way that it is assumed you will play AD&D second. Like I said, there are sometimes a lot of the more modern adventures that we'll refer to here. They actually talk about it's where there are set kind of keyed encounters, either in a location or there's a specific story trigger that'll happen, and then you will engage in that combat encounter. But if you are going to do random encounters, there's full rules for setting that stuff up. Let me hold it up here. Boom. Depending on the terrain, depending on like how civilized it is. So it's great. And random encounters are another one of those little things like the random reactions and whatnot that for myself, I really love about this old school play. And there are two ways of looking at those kinds of encounters. One of them is well, this makes no fucking sense. This is just silly that we're having this encounter. And that's a completely fair, if that's what your perspective is on it, that's completely fine. The other perspective is that, okay, this is happening. Now we need to make sense of why this is happening. And that is how I use random encounters. I use them as an opportunity for me as the DM to learn more about, oh, interesting, so this is happening here. So why is this happening? And the way I describe them is there's an old thing that Marvel Comics has had since the 60s called the No Prize. And what the No Prize was when you wrote in and you said, hey, there's a plot hole that you have in your story. This happened, but that doesn't make sense based on what you said before. But if you then add in why it actually isn't a problem, you would get a No Prize. So it's like, hey, this was a plot hole, but here's why it's actually not a plot hole because of so-and-so's powers or what they did. And Stan Lee would used to say, oh, you get a No Prize. And that's the way I think of it, is that like, okay, well, we've randomly encountered a bunch of goblins just outside of town. This is weird, but okay, so this is happening. Why is this happening? And how can I use this as a way of reinforcing some of the broader themes and elements that I've got in my game? You're not going to be using necessarily just every, a random encounter table with every monster on it. You're going to set it, for one thing, to the level and to the, because you're not going to be unfair in the game. Just because it's an old school game doesn't mean you're going to be unfair to the players. First level characters fighting a wyvern, that's another kind of those boogeyman things. You set it just like any modern game to being, some things are going to be easy, some things are going to be moderately challenging, some things they may need to run from. But that's the thing I like about it, is that it adds that fun challenge on the fly of like, okay, now we're building the story by discovering it, and I like that. And then that has a feedback loop where the more you do that, the more you might adjust certain things, like you'll adjust the random encounter tables or whatever. So anyway, that's why I strongly enjoy using or greatly enjoy using random encounters. Then there's rules for quick NPCs, just like in modern games too. There's some rules for weather, which are not as well fleshed out as the Wilderness Survival Guide. And then there's the treasure, treasure types and the different magic items. One of the ways where this game differs from modern games too is that the Identify spell is a first level magic spell that is especially for low levels, has a very low likelihood of succeeding, and it has a material component cost that is quite expensive. Rules as written. It also has a very punishing cost in the sense of you lose a bunch of constitution, so like 9 constitution points. You gain them back 1 per hour, but it just takes a big toll on the character, and it only gives you a very limited chance, like 10% per level, of actually identifying what the spell is. And now, again, like people may say, well, that's just bullshit. But there are ways, you get around that stuff. For one thing, players can cast detect magic to identify items, and we often, I think we as DMs often end up describing what the magic items are. Now, you can be the type of DM where you're kind of requiring them to get everything in a pile and then cast detect magic and see what's magic and keep only that stuff. If that's your style, that's the kind of game you want to play, that's completely fine. But you can also, what I like is that the players at low level in the current campaign, they would hire someone who's a higher level to identify their magic items for them, and they'd negotiate with them and kind of do favors for them to try and drive the price of casting that magic down. And now the characters have been casting it themselves. I have been waiving the material component cost for that because I don't really care. I think it's cool that the players are doing it, and they've got such a low chance of success that it gives them something interesting to do per day. Like in our last downtime session, while some other characters were training, the 2 wizards in the party were casting Identify over and over again, and each time they cast it, they get to roll percentage chance, and it took them about a week to identify everything. But I like that. I liked that it made magic feel powerful but slow, and Yeah, I mean, and it gave them something to do during downtime as well too. If I was enforcing the rules as written, where it was 100 GP each time, well then they'd never, they'd never identify that stuff. But yeah, so that's that. And then the last core rulebook is the Monstrous Manual. The Monstrous Manual has, I believe it's over 300, sorry, more than 600 monsters in here. And it's all your standards. It's, and the nice thing with this edition of it is some of the art is not, I don't know if modern people would really dig on it, but about half of the art in here is by an artist named Tony DiTerlizzi. And Tony DiTerlizzi cut his teeth in D&D working on the Planescape setting, which is a very signature setting. And his art is incredible. He's gone on to do the Spiderwick Chronicles, a children's book series. That's, I think, what he might be most well known for otherwise. But, like, check out his Dragon Turtle. Come on, computer. Wait, there he is. Look at that little guy. Come on, focus. He's not going to focus. You're just going to have to trust me. His art's amazing in here. And the nice thing is everything is pretty much on one page for every one of the monsters, and there is a massive variety of monsters in here. And these are, it's not like modern games where you really need to, to tweak them and like really learn the monsters and all the different spells and stuff that you need to track. And like different games, that's I'm kind of talking about like Pathfinder or 3rd edition, that there's a lot of special rules you need to learn for each of your monsters for it. Pathfinder 2 and D&D 5th have done a very good job of simplifying that stuff. But yeah, I mean, I run this, when I run monsters, I open the book and run them directly out of here. I love this book. I absolutely love it. And one of my favorite monsters of all time is, of course, the Owlbear. And there's Tony DiTerlizzi's Owlbear. Love it. Love it, love it. So, 600 monsters, and then there's encounter tables in here. There's rules for generating NPC groups as well, too, which is pretty cool. So it's, with the core rulebooks, the 3 of them together, that gives you everything you need to run any kind of traditional style D&D game. And most of what's in these core rulebooks as well will give you enough to run, even like if you were going to say take Rise of the Rune Lords and run that, you'd have about 80% of what you need to just run with these 3 rulebooks. So, and you may think, well, Kev, that's kind of crazy. Like, why would you couldn't just take a Pathfinder adventure and run it directly? Well, no, you're right, not directly, but there's enough similarities. There's more similarities between the AD&D 2nd and modern editions. Well, 2nd and 5th and Pathfinder 1st edition. There's more similarities between those than there are differences. So you can easily steal that stuff and use it setting-wise. You just need to adjust the numbers, right? Like, especially for the characters in mid-level in D&D can handle, or AD&D can handle a lot more things. You don't need to worry about creating balanced encounters necessarily. You can trust that players will make clever use of surroundings and so forth. So that's the core rulebooks, and that's taken a lot longer than I had expected. So maybe what I'll do is I'm going to try to speed through what... first off, let's finish up the talk about those core rulebooks. So that's what's in the book. Who is this for? So the core rulebooks here, if you are someone who is nostalgic for that old school play, but either yourself or not everyone at your table is ready to go back to the bare bones approach of AD&D 1. If you're not concerned about, so assuming you got some interest in trying this old school style of play, well, that's something to go to. If you want something very quick and easy to introduce to a big group of kids, this game's pretty handy for that. You might want to adjust THAC0, or the way you're using that. But again, like with kids' brains, they can sop that shit up pretty quickly. I did. A lot of the people, everyone I played with did as well. So it's more adults that have a harder time of adjusting to thinking like that. But again, you can use the math that I mentioned at the outset of this overview to just make it a plus whatever number. If you got a group that wants a different experience, a different style of playing, if you find that PF2 combats take too long, or They're just too involved, and too much of your time at the table is spent on that. And again, like, it's not to say that the combat is not amazing in that. It's just, if you feel that the real estate, the amount of time in your sessions are taken up too much with that, this is a pretty good alternative. It's a very different game, but you're still able to play a fantasy setting. If you want to play a sandbox game, there's a lot of different products that are out nowadays that are trying to recapture the old school feel of with 5th edition D&D, and in particular, like, a lot of people talking about different settings, wanting to run Dark Sun or Spelljammer, with D&D 5th. And it may be that it's because those people really love D&D 5th and they want to capture that, but, like, to be honest, if you really want to capture those settings, just run it with AD&D 2nd. You can get access to most of the stuff pretty well. There's a massive secondary market for all this stuff, and thanks to the Dungeon Masters Guild, you can gain access to PDFs and, in a lot of cases, print copies of almost everything that's out. I mean, that's not true. It's about 50% maybe of the products that are actually print on demand, as opposed to the ones that you can only get in PDF. But man, they're great, and it's very easy to get access to that stuff. It's very easy to run. I find it's a lot less prep work. I can focus more on the story and the settings and things like that than I do when I'm prepping a modern game, where I do want to be thinking about balance and whatnot, and make sure the combat encounters are challenging but not overwhelming. This, I set up what is sort of the situation in a certain place, and just go. Random encounters are very easy to run in this, because you pick up and play. So that's, if you want to run a sandbox style play, or you want to run in one of those classic settings, use this as a starting point. Now, let's talk about the house rules. So again, the game is very customizable. You can find massive amounts of suggestions online for how to customize this game to make it play the way you want it to play. Here's the things I do. Like I said, every wizard can cast cantrip once per day. That's their ability to kind of be magical and whatnot. I use the XP things that I mentioned before, where XP for treasure, XP for classes, the class specific stuff, XP for role-playing things in some cases, for achieving goals, all that sort of stuff. I also, let's see here. I use 4d4 plus 4 to create stats, and then I allow the characters to swap 1 for 1. The reason I do that is because, again, I want the characters to feel like heroes. I'm fine with them. I want them to be badass at their class, but I don't necessarily want to allow them to all buy it up to 18. I want them to be stuck with some of their dice rolls. And I also want them to have an interesting mix of stats, which may drive which proficiencies they check. So you may end up with some interesting proficiency choices that are not what you would have necessarily expected. This is the wizard who's a good tracker, because he rolled an awesome wisdom as well as an awesome intelligence. Most importantly, for the tone that I want in my game, I use a narrative metacurrency that I call Astonishing Fortune. And it's a carryover from something I use in Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers of Hyperborea. It's very much like hero points or action points or, whatever. You can use it for two things. You can use it to re-roll a dice roll. So that's a task dice roll. So re-roll a save, re-roll an attack roll, or re-roll a skill, like a thief skill. And you can use it to not die. So if you would die at some point, you can spend it that way. The number of Astonishing Fortune points that players start with is equal to the number of players, and everyone shares a pool. So you have 8 players at a session, you got 8 points of Astonishing Fortune per game. Sometimes you finish the session, and then I give 50 XP for each unspent point of Astonishing Fortune. So those role-play heavy sessions where players are not making a lot of dice rolls, you still get a pretty decent XP reward at the end. Not great, but at least something. Or if you're having a very combat heavy thing, it helps sand the rough edges off of some of the more dangerous things. Now, in my astonishing, if you're a regular viewer and you watch our astonishing swordsmen and sorcerers of Hyperborea game, you'll know that you can do a lot more with astonishing fortune in that game, like negate a hit, make an auto success on a save and whatnot. But for my particular AD&D campaign for Night Below, I didn't want it to be quite that good. I wanted to try it a little less forgiving. And even now, like, it's been great. It doesn't overpower the characters, but it definitely gives them the opportunity to, especially for those turfed saves where it would be a save or die kind of situation, it gives them a little bit of extra durability. But by no means does it take away any of the feeling of threat or danger. You can ask any of my players that life still feels really dangerous for them. So those are, I think, most of the house rules. Like, I mean, I mentioned the training rules I kind of customize. I change specialization a little bit, because I want to use non-weapon proficiency, but I don't want to use weapon proficiency. So I've got a set of house rules for that. Yeah, and as I said, like, we've been playing for. If you're someone who has been away from AD&D Second for a long time and wants to go back, two things I would recommend is, for one, I mean, definitely give it a try again. Give it a try with a big group. Make sure you're going into it with the correct expectations. As I said, like, don't go into it expecting that you are going to get the same experience as you are in, like, 5th edition. It is a very different type of game, and you do need to, if you come from a group that plays a lot of games or is more familiar or only familiar with modern games, you definitely need to have a conversation with them about what to expect. But that's no different than if you're running, like, a horror game or a mystery game. You have to have those correct expectations going into it. If you go into a Call of Cthulhu game expecting to solve things the way you do in a Pathfinder 2nd edition game, you are going to have a bad time. It's not going to be the experience you want. And it's the same thing with this. You just need to make sure people are going in with that expectation. If it is the game they're going for, holy smokes, can you have a lot of fun with it? I love that the players are not, that they aren't as durable. There have been sessions where the players, after a massive fight with goblins where they were left, beaten and bloodied and whatever else, they had to drag themselves for like 2 days across the wilderness to get back to their town. And you're only regaining 1 hit point per day because either the cleric wasn't there that day, or the cleric was unconscious or something. And man, oh man, like, those are some tense random encounters, for when the players are hoping they don't come across something. And even if they do, you just, so long as the DM's not playing bullshit, like, you're not fudging the rolls, you're not throwing stuff at them that's going to kill them, they will accept that it's the random roll. I guess that's another thing to mention, is that who's it for? It's for people who are willing to let the dice kind of fall where they may. I allow Astonishing Fortune to blunt some of that, to allow the heroes to still, to not be subject to a bad random encounter and then die. But I mean, without the threat of death, without the meaningful threat of death, then it's not really a challenge anyway, is it? I mean, that has to be a consequence. And that's unfair. They're obviously, because of the way D&D 5th works and it's a lot of modern games, people don't want to lose their characters. And that's not to say that you have to lose your characters in this. We've gone 22 sessions without losing a single character. Very close sometimes, but not yet. But that really adds the drama and the tension for those things. When the players are scrambling along, trying to get themselves back, and you may say that, well, that doesn't make them feel like badasses. No, not during that time. But once our players re-equipped and they went back to them, and they had prepared, these mobile barriers to protect themselves against the archer fire as they're slowly making their way in, and then they kicked the shit out of those goblins, that was so much more satisfying for the players, because they really, really earned that, and there was good history behind the fight that they had with those goblins because of that ass kicking they got before. And it was great. I mean, like, it's just, and that's the style of play. The game does not assume that you are a hero, but it certainly gives you the opportunity to be one. And that's what's so enjoyable about it. If that's what you want from your experience, for that kind of emergent play, for it to be an oracular style of game where you as the DM are setting some things in motion, but you and the players know that you're not, your hand's not on the what's the scale, I guess is the saying. You're not forcing things into a specific direction. If they trust that you are also embracing the oracular nature of the game, they're going to be on board with it, you know. And it also makes it very easy for you to be a fan of the players. I cheer louder than anyone else when they get critical hits, when they get great initiative scores, because I want my players to win. But that's because the forces they're facing are really challenging, and that's largely due to the nature of the game, you know, how the game actually plays at the table. So if any of that sounds cool to you, I would definitely try giving it a try at the table, and find what rules are right for your table as well too. You know, if you find that the stats are too high or they're too low or whatever, make a change. You know, make the game your own, make it fit the way that you want it to fit. So let's end this with a quick overview of some of the stuff that's out there. I'm gonna try and keep this to half an hour because I see we're already at 2 hours. Yeah, let's see here. So the expansions. So let's talk about the things that kind of went that expanded out this game that you can find. All of these are available for reasonable prices on the aftermarket, or you can get PDFs from drive-thru, or you can find print-on-demand versions of a lot of these from drive-thru. A really useful one is the Tome of Magic. Tome of Magic expands out magical options for different characters. It also introduces, in addition to a bunch of really cool spells, it also introduces the Elementalist class and the Wild Mage class. And I've heard the Wild Mage class can be a bit of a nightmare to have at the table. I haven't got one yet, but I do have an Elementalist at the table, and they are pretty fucking cool. It just expands the spell lists. It expands some extra rules for different types of specialty mages. So it's a cool addition. Once if you've got some spellcasters in your group and you want to expand the options that are available to them. There is, of course, the kits, the infamous complete books. Goodness. So these things run the gamut of. There are different class books here as well, and like to give you a sense of just how many of these damn things there are. This is everything. Whoa, shit! There's the class and race ones, like wizard and fighter. Each of these is about 130 pages. Yeah, about 130 pages. It gives you a ton of different kits, and kits can be things as simple as academic mage or savage mage or whatever. They also provide special rules, like special advantages they gain, special restrictions they gain. Every one of these, if you are going to incorporate them, you need to make sure your players understand that everything is subject to DM approval. You're going to want to take a look at what the rules are, because depending on the game, depending on your campaign, some of them will be abnormally more beneficial for the game than what it seems. That's a generous way of looking at it. A less generous way is that some of the shit was written and put right into print, so it's just not balanced terribly well. Drive-Thru RPG does this really neat thing where it gives a product history of each of the things that are available, and they have great descriptions of the problems and not problems with each one of these things too. So it's pretty cool. In addition to the all the core classes, they also have certain ones that introduce other classes, like the Complete Ninja Handbook. The Druid, well, the Druid's already in there. Bards. They have some racial ones, like the Complete Book of Gnomes and Halflings, Complete Book of Dwarves. They introduce the Barbarian class, and Complete Book of Elves, which is notorious for having some of the most broken kits in it. But it was something I never owned as a kid. But it actually has the kits are, there's a couple of ones in here that are crazy unbalanced. I would never allow them without serious modification, but there is a ton of really great stuff that's in here for differences between elves and so forth. So great setting material in there. And the dwarf one as well too. One reason I love this is because almost all, if not all, of the art inside is done by Larry Elmore. And I love Larry Elmore's art from back in the days of Dragonlance. So look at that, bunch of dwarves dancing around. They also have, this is what introduced the Psionics Handbook. This is the Psionics rules, which will become important for one of the settings we're talking about later. It's an interesting Yeah, it's a really interesting set of rules because it, while there are psionics handbooks that have come with later editions too, I don't know what's going on with my camera. Like the third edition had two different, one for third, one for 3.5. The neat thing about this one is that psionics feel very different from spells. They are all driven by effectively proficiency checks. Yeah, I mean, it's there. It is not balanced the way that spells are, even though spells are kind of unbalanced as well. But I'm fine with it. Like, I think it's a really cool mechanic. I did sort of a long route to get back. Dark Sun is one of my. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But Dark Sun's one of my favorite settings for AD&D. And for years, I've tried to convert other systems over to run Dark Sun, and I created my own custom setting or custom set of rules to run a Dark Sun game at 1.2 before finally realizing recently, hold on, let's take a look at those AD&D second rules again, and they're fine. I think they're interesting and they give a different flavor to your character. I would use and allow psionics in any of my games. And then another neat one, Complete Book of Humanoids. This adds back in the half-orcs for the first time. Orcs, giants, there's lots of different ways of playing monsters. Aarakocra, Lizardman, and stuff like that. It's not terribly balanced, necessarily, but you know what? Like, with this kind of game, you kind of have to just accept that there isn't mechanical balance and live with the social consequences, right? Like, if you're not playing in a setting where it's completely cosmopolitan and every race is accepted everywhere kind of stuff, then the cost, if players do want to play a humanoid character, then they're going to be paying a role-playing or reaction kind of consequence for it. So I'm not really, combat stuff for some of these things in here, they are certainly not balanced in terms of comparing one character to another character, but I don't really care about that stuff. And I mean, if you are and your players are particularly concerned about it, if one player wants to play something that's unbalanced and it sounds like it'll be a fun addition to the group, I don't know why you wouldn't just say, all right, play it. I don't need to feel that my character is so much, worse by comparison to yours. But in any event, so that's in there too. I mean, you get lots of optional rules for playing a bunch of different kinds of humanoids. For DMs who want to run a historical thing, there's a massive collection of different historical settings, which include Reformation Europe, classic Greece, Glory of Rome. There's a Viking source book. There's a Charlemagne source book. There's a Crusades source book. So lots of cool options there. If you really want more monsters, I got these suckers here. Each of these adds a shit ton of extra monsters into it too, and there's a lot of different setting-based ones as well. There are 4 ones. There are, of course, the loose-leaf ones that you can get, but those are fucking garbage. I would not get those. These suckers you can get for a reasonable price as well too, cheaper than a new DMG. And then these ones are a little more expensive just because they're harder to get, but for the Planescape setting, there's 3 of them in total. 2 of them were actually have all art done by Tony DiTerlizzi, same guy I mentioned from before. And just to give you a sense of why he is so well thought of, which is one of the cool ones here. Oh, here's some the Equinals in here. Let's see. There you go. His art is very distinctive, very kind of storybooky, and it really gave the Planescape setting its own flavor. It really gave it a distinctive look. Oops, there's another as well. So that's 2 books with extra monsters for him. There's 3 for Ravenloft, their gothic horror setting as well too. So if you want extra monsters, and again, like the core rulebook has, or the monster manual has 600 new monsters, but these actually each add 300 new monsters, so you're no shortage of that. There's a bunch of neat, I've got them back there, I won't bring them out, but there's these blue books, which are basically the equivalent of these, but for the DM. And those are mixed. Some of them are more useful than others, but there's a complete villain book that's kind of handy, because it's got neat ideas for designing specific villain characters. It's not really system specific necessarily, but some good advice on DMing and so forth. For myself, I picked them up largely just for the collection. But if you are looking for something similar that is contemporaneous with these books, that gives you advice on DMing and running these games, that's a pretty good resource for it. Let's talk about the settings, though. Settings are the things that really, made AD&D, I think, it's best known for. I'm going to try and go through the order that these things came out. So first new one was Spelljammer. Now this is the print-on-demand version that I got from Drive-Thru RPG because I don't have a box set of it. But it's got everything in there. Spelljammer is this wacko setting of like D&D in space. It's there's no guns necessarily apart from like arquebus or arquebuses. I don't know. There are some neat, unique races that we're introducing here, but it's got this. If you've seen at the time of recording, there was a video that came out recently of the new Baldur's Gate game, and there was featured in that was a illithid or a mind flayer nautiloid. Well, that sucker, poof, came from here. So if you like the idea of your characters going around in space, with a space elven empire fighting, mind flayer pirates and beholder ships and Nyogi, these like weird spider creatures that enslave Umber Hulks, and dwarven asteroid ships and giant space hamsters and all that kind of craziness. This is a terrific setting for that. It's a really very unique and interesting twist for D&D. Forgotten Realms, of course, has very well represented in second edition. For myself personally, I'm not really a big Forgotten Realms fan, which is why this is the hardback that first came out for it. There is a box set for it that came out that was a replacement for the old gray box set as well. So, there is more setting specific stuff for it, but this has got a really good starting point for running Forgotten Realms stuff in there, including rules for specialty priests. I mentioned that clerics, there's general clerics and there's specialty priests, and each of those is different. Well, the neat thing is in this book you have, and then reproduced in another book we're going to look at, there's specialty priests, and check out, there's all your different priests dressed in their specific robes for the different gods. So there's lots of interesting visuals in here as well as rules for that, new spells, and little blurbs about different settings. One of my personal faves is Ravenloft, the Domain of Dread. This is the setting that is the gothic horror setting for AD&D second. It launched a line of just terrific horror stuff for the setting. Not only adventures that are pretty good too, but they published these great monster guides that basically expanded the rules for a whole bunch of different monsters, like Van Richten's Guide to Vampires, to Werebeasts, and then whatever other ones I got here, Ghosts, and it's a whole book on basically optional, not only in-universe stuff that gives you some interesting flavor for running those specific types of monsters and adventure ideas, but also neat ways of reskinning rules. So if you got a vampire who maybe transforms into Jaguar, or is a little more powerful, or a vampire who's a mage, or something like that. So that was really, really great. And each of those, Forgotten Realms is pretty much, if you play D&D, you're going to play it very similar in Forgotten Realms. Realms experts will, of course, correct me and say, no, it feels different. But characters you can play in, if you've got a character from Greyhawk, more often than not, you're going to be able to recreate that same character in Forgotten Realms. So, but Ravenloft is one of the first times, and Spelljammer as well, where it's a very different type of setting. You're playing very, very different types of characters. That was expanded even further with Dark Sun, my personal fave. Dark Sun is set on the blasted land of Athos. It is a desert planet where all of your favorite classes and races are twisted. There's no gods. Instead, there are elemental powers that can grant clerics their powers. Elves are thieves and nomads who run around the deserts. Dwarves are beardless and follow a devotion towards a specific focus. Halflings are cannibals who live in a forgotten ridge or a distant ringing mountains and a jungle on the far side of those mountains. Sorcerers draw power from the very earth to cast their spells. It's a very, very cool setting where also psionics plays a huge role in the setting, where every player character at least, has a kind of psionic power. So that is pretty awesome. The setting that did the best job of incorporating kits alongside the classes and the setting is Al-Qadim. Al-Qadim is the Arabian Adventures style setting for, they say it's got Forgotten Realms branding on it, at least oh boy, there's the Al-Qadim Land of Fate box set. The setting for it has that stuff in it, but the cool thing is what it does is it restricts the classes to specific, very thematically appropriate kits. So you've got like the Desert Rider, and they're not too specific, like to individual classes. It's to the overall classes. Warriors, which includes fighters, rangers, and paladins, can take certain kits, and it's a really great unified vision of taking those kit rules and putting it all into one. And unlike the complete books, all the kits in here are balanced. They also have a really interesting, unique type of wizard called a Shair, who can ensnare genies. It's pretty neat. Greyhawk got some love in this edition as well too, with the From the Ashes box set. This has, depending on your pedigree and depending on how much how much attachment you have to the original vision of Greyhawk, you either find this to be very cool, which I do, or you find it to be a bit of a sacrilege departure from the traditional Greyhawk setting. Greyhawk is a really, it's everything that you accept as usual part, for the par, D&D experience is something found in Greyhawk. And the From the Ashes thing is right after this massive series of conflicts called the Greyhawk Wars. So it's a fun kind of post-war, still some evil rising sort of time period for it. So I really like the setting in that. It's also one of the first box sets that I owned for any setting. So it's got a special place in my heart. Dragonlance, the thing based on the books and the original modules, got some love in second edition as well too. It's a really good product. Like, it's got this, the Tales of the Lance box set has more, I think more adventure stuff in it, like just in terms of sheer content for new classes, new races, setting information and shit like that, than any other product that came out in the second edition life cycle. It's a really, if you do dig on the Dragonlance setting with all the things that come with that, then it's a really terrific thing to pick up in PDF or in print as well. They did a modern day horror thing as part of the Ravenloft expansion in the mid 90s called Mask of the Red Death, which is basically like playing AD&D in 19th century our Earth. It's not in retrospect, having read it now, this is the print-on-demand version of the box set. It's really not a great product, but I have really good memories of adventures we've run with this. So, I may need to get it back to the table again. It's a really cool, if you're a fan of like Rippers or for the Savage Worlds products, or I don't know, like then like 19th century horror. This could be a really fun thing to play. I think there might be other games that would do a better job of that type of thing, but still a pretty cool setting. There is Planescape. My box set is destroyed for this, so I don't have it anymore. Planescape is the setting that is full of... It's described in a nutshell as like philosophers with clubs. The setting is located around this place called Sigil, which is the City of Doors. It's a door with doors to anywhere else in the dimensions. It's right at the center of effectively the multiverse, accentuated around this massive, prominence of stone called the Spire. And your characters are basically in the metropolis of the plains. So you're living in a city where, by virtue of the powerful creature called the Queen of Blades, I think, Lady of Pain, who prevents everyone from fighting, your characters could, make a deal with a archdemon, or, be hired by an archangel. to do a job or whatever. Like that, encounter a person who's got the blood of Slotty in them. Like it's a bonkers setting that also is framed with these different factions, which are basically like, honestly, there's a lot of them are patterned off of different either philosophical or political movements, but they're all set up and they're all in tension in this big city of Sigil. It's a totally, for the time, it was such a crazy departure from usual D&D stuff, and it really led, it really leaned into the role-playing story side of the game as opposed to the mechanical stuff. You're not going to fight a demon at first level, but maybe you'll be able to deal with them. Maybe you're there is one that's lurking in the background as an adversary. Not all fights need to be with combat, so it's a really unique setting. I've got friends who really hate it, and I got friends who really love it, and I am in the latter category. I love Planescape. I think it's awesome, and the idea of being able to, like, at low levels have the characters go to the court of a god and encounter, and deal with their functionaries and things like that. It reminds me a lot of like the crazier fairy tale kind of stuff that Neil Gaiman has in in Sandman, the comic in particular. I really like that as an option for a setting. The second to last one that was published was Birthright. And Birthright was 95. It is where your characters are, the default assumption for the campaign is that you're playing characters who are heirs to a kingdom, and that in this particular game or setting, by virtue of your blood, you actually have powers that you draw from the land too. So it scales D&D up to being like domain level play, and it's cool. I've never really run anything in Birthright, but from everything I've read, I liked about it. If you like Game of Thrones, it would be a terrific way of modeling it. It's got some neat rules in it for simplifying domain play and domain challenges and mass combat. So, it definitely supplements the base game with those rules you would need to play like people running kingdoms and stuff like that. And it allows you to engage in that stuff right from the get-go, as opposed to having to wait till 9th level, or name level when you're building a stronghold or whatever. The last setting that came out for it is Jakandor, Island of War, and I don't own any of that stuff because I didn't really appeal to me at the time, and it is very expensive to get a hold of now, and I have no interest in buying it. But there is another setting that came out just after Wizards of the Coast had acquired TSR, but before they put the pin in AD&D 2nd edition. So anyway, that is for the setting stuff. That's a very quick overview. The reason I wanted to go through all that stuff is just to show you the wealth of stuff that's out there. It's been the last couple of years is where I've been slowly piecing together my collection for AD&D 2nd stuff, and the thing I've been surprised by is just how good this stuff is. Like, there's some stinkers, no doubt, but there's so much good stuff that's out there as well, including, I should say, as well, too, what we're actually running. This is my the box set of Night Below that I picked up because we've been running it for quite a while now. But the first one I picked up was the print on demand, this sucker here, and I will tell you that I use this way more than I use the box set. I find it much more convenient to read this sucker and to have this as my reference thing than to be fiddling with all the extra books and whatnot that are in there. I mention it only because it is a really good campaign. But the print-on-demand stuff from Drive-Thru is really good. Just because, for myself, I enjoyed filling out my collection with this stuff, because that's just, that's my midlife crisis, I guess. But I mean, the print-on-demand stuff is really, really good, and it makes a very affordable way to get access to this particular game. If you're trying to get a hold of original prints of a lot of the stuff, it can be fairly pricey, especially for certain things. The reason I haven't replaced my Planescape box set is because I'm not willing to pay what eBay is asking me to pay for that box set. I don't plan to run it at any point, so I don't really want to just for the sake of getting a box to pay the price of it. But I could get it on PDF very easily. I don't think you can get it in print on demand, not that box set at least, but you can get it and you can print it. If you're playing in person, you can print those maps off and so forth. So yeah, and if you're playing online, it's even easier. I use the maps and many of the handouts directly from when I got my print on demand. I got a PDF copy as well, and I get shit right out of those PDFs to use in my online Roll20 game. So it makes it very easy to snip stuff out of here as opposed to like scanning in the stuff from my my box set. So yeah, I mean, it's I guess, like, you know, the reason I wanted to breeze through all those different things again is also to show the scope of that game. You know, like like AD&D Second does, it feels like it is treated like the ugly stepchild of the sort of OSR and old school kind of community, but I don't think that is well deserved. The thing, all the different cool settings that came from that, and I mean the fact that it is a little more, you know, it codifies the proficiency rules. It hits a level of crunch that I really like. It gives my players some options for it without making that mini game so important that I have to concern myself with that. I guess one other thing I mentioned at the outset as well too is being able to let this system take care of itself. That is a huge thing for me personally. Like, I love not having to worry about, am I giving them enough XP? Should I give them more? Am I worried about them leveling out of the content? I don't worry about any of that shit with this. I just give XP. You know, I give what's said by the rules, and I trust that the game will take care of itself. And the reason for that is because the game has contemplated all of those different things. It has contemplated sandbox-style games. It has contemplated role-play heavy style games. And it contemplates with a vast array of different settings you can use, with all the optional rules that are on. Oh, there's one other thing I'll point out as well. I forgot. There's one of the last things that came out for it, 95, 96. And that's the player's option books. Get over here. These things are ways of expanding your combat. So if you want your AD&D Second combat to look a lot like 3rd edition or Pathfinder combat and tactics will do that. That's right. Here. Nope, that's high level play. Combat and tactics right here. If you want custom new kinds of magic and shit like that, spells and magic. This also introduces new spellcasting classes. The Crusader, and I think the Monk is introduced in here as well. Skills and Powers is a way of completely rewriting the game and writing custom classes. I'll never use this. I have absolutely no use for this, but there are people who love this. There are people who absolutely, this is their version of AD&D Second. So just because I don't like it, don't take it as being something that is not worth getting. And there's high-level campaigns as well, too, for playing those epic level play. All of which is, again, available on Drive-Thru RPG as well. And I think all of these are on print on demand. You can get print copies if you choose. And like for myself, the way I approach this shit is by picking the stuff I want to keep. You know, I grabbed a little bit from Dark Sun for the stat generation. I use some options from Combat and Tactics. And I use some stuff from other OSR games like Astonishing Swordsman and Sorcerers of Hyperborea. It is an enormously flexible game. I love the grounded level of, I don't know, like the lethality that comes with, or the threat of lethality that comes from combat. It's unlikely. If your players face, small groups of goblins at low levels, it's very unlikely they'll die. At least no more so in this game than it is in, say, 5th, or first level Pathfinder. But, I don't know, there's just something about the style of play here that just, playing that long, I guess maybe part of it also is because of the way XP works, you get to spend more time at low level. So, there's something about games like this and like Call of Cthulhu where there isn't a lot of stuff on your character sheet. Because the players they're not looking for the answers to the problems they're facing in the game on their character sheet. They're facing the fiction. They're trying to figure out some way to engage with the story to get their advantage, even if it's a tactical advantage and whatnot, or just sneak past them, or whatever they're trying to achieve in it. The fact that they are limited in their hit points and they're limited in their spells and shit like that, it's so much fun how much they are forced to engage, to think in the story and try and figure out some way of working that to their advantage. It feels like it is a much more immersive type of play than games where the characters are going like with a more tactical depth to it. Where there is the critical hits, there is the detailed critical hits. There is the host of options you have in for different powers. For this one as well too, I should say, there are tactical options in the game, and I incorporate many of those with my house rules, which again I'll link in the description. But yeah, I just if you want that more grounded play, the fact that there isn't a lot of I don't know. I probably have said enough. I think I've said everything that I likely need to say. This is either suggested to you that this is the type of game you might want to try, or it's just not something that's going to fit for you or your players or whatever. At the very least, I hope this has been helpful for you to decide whether AD&D Second is something that is worth you checking out, and perhaps even running at some point. I don't know. I hope that this has been helpful. I'm sure I have missed some things. I'm sure that other people have ideas to add to this as well too, other suggestions. The thing that, again, like I said at the outset, one of the most interesting things about running this and then getting response from viewers has been how different everyone's experience with AD&D has been. Some negative, obviously, but also some very positive, and a very different set of rules. Like it really does seem like no one played by the same set of rules. I don't use critical hits in my game, and that's for both sides. I don't. Monsters don't crit on heroes. Heroes don't crit either. That is an option you can incorporate if that's what you want. But what that does is it does smooth the combat out a little bit, so that the players aren't getting dropped by my nat 20 I'm rolling on my goblin arrow, right? So yeah. Anyway, as is always the case, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns regarding this overview, please do not hesitate to leave a comment in the comment section of this video, and I will endeavor to reply in a timely fashion. In addition, you can reach me by email. My email address is dungeonmusings@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is dungeonmusings@gmail.com. You can also find me on, if you follow a link in the bottom of this video, there is a link to the Dungeon Musings Discord server, and you can find me on there, as well as a bunch of other people. We have channels dedicated to the AD&D campaign we're running. We have a channel dedicated to AD&D discussion in general, as well as all the other games we run on the channel, including the things I mentioned earlier, like Pathfinder 2nd and Masks, the New Generation, and Cult, and all those other things. As well as like Find a Group games and so forth. So, if you're looking to get into an AD&D game, that is a way to step closer, and you may be able to find people who you might want to play with as well. Finally, you'll find a link in the description of this video to something called Heroes Save Villages. That is the charity fundraising campaign that we run on the channel. It benefits the SOS Children's Villages International charity. And that is a charity that is active in over 130 different countries, that benefits over 80,000 orphaned and abandoned children around the world. At the time of recording, there may be different rewards that are available on there. If you happen to be listening to me live, the one thing I'll say right again, like when I'm recording this is within the first week of the North American kind of quarantine or isolation. Everyone's staying from home, and at this time we don't know what the economic impact of the pandemic is going to be on everybody. So for now, like what I'm encouraging is this: everyone take care of yourself. Everyone take care of if you have the means and the inclination to donate to Heroes Save Villages. All money goes directly to SOS Children's Villages International. None of it goes to me, but I can appreciate that this is going to be a challenging time for a lot of folks. So I do not want anyone to feel obliged to click through. If you are willing and able and are in the position to do that, by all means, the kids can always use that that money, and they'll certainly be struggling like everyone else in the course of this pandemic. But it's going to be a tough time for a lot of folks. I don't want, take care of yourself, take care of your family, make sure that you're in a position where then you can be generous with your money, your gold coins. But anyway, last thing I'll say is, again, thank you so much for watching. As always, I appreciate all future feedback we get on this. I'd love to hear what everyone's nostalgic, memories of AD&D are, what house rules you used, or if you just want to share your own gushing memories of AD&D with me, I'd love to hear them. So anyway, thank you again for listening, folks, and until I see you again. Oh, you know what? Last thing I had to do. Let's check chat. Let's see what we got in chat. I forgot to do that earlier. Sorry, folks. I didn't want to lose my my groove. I was in there. Defend your lady's honor. Nice. Hi, guys. Hey, Cameron. Hey, Brandon. I think had Gaga's been allowed to stick around, we would have gotten something closer to second edition. It's a fine system. Yeah, nice. Thanks, boy. Yeah. I'm with you on that one. I really enjoyed the players. Oh, cool. We got some people sharing some rules in there. Oh, thanks, Kent. Kent says, very kind words. Keep the videos coming. You got it, buddy. If there's a table on those older, how much hirelings cost? Yeah, Cameron has a question of, is there a table for how much hirelings cost? It's in the DMG. DMG has the cost for various hirelings in there. It is not as expansive as the one that was in first edition. So if you want something a little more detailed, there's a product called Osric, which is the old school, old school index reference compilation. You can find a copy for free online. It has really great rules for hirelings, like tracking them down, how much it costs to get them, hiring a crier. So it's not in the DMG, but you can supplement the rules in the DMG with that to make a really fun kind of mini game of that if you want. So that's where you find that, Cameron. Yeah. Oh, and it looks like Steve the NPC has already answered me. Nice, way ahead of me. Let's see here. Cheapskate, yeah. Oh, and Brandon says, D-Tier Lisi's Cat Lord. Yeah, you damn right. Show the Rakshasa. Hold on. Where's the, I don't know where I put my monster book. Sorry, Brandon. I stuffed them away. I came in accessing, or getting so much, accessories to get through this whole overview that I've had to toss shit aside as I got it. So anyway, for those listening at home, again, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found this edifying, and hope this helped you make a decision as to whether to give second edition a try. I guess I also, now that I'm spending more time, if you want to see us play this game and the version we play, you can go onto the Dungeon Musings you can go on the Dungeon Musings YouTube channel, and you can find our Night Below campaign. We got 22 episodes up so far at the time of recording, and we're going to keep on going with that. So if you want to see a bunch of goons playing AD&D second edition, you can feel free to go there. In addition, if you found this informative, and if you want to see more of the content, be sure to hit on subscribe and the bell icon to let you know when we're going live. And in addition, every Sunday night I post the schedule for the Dungeon Musings channel on the community tab of the Dungeon Musings channel, so you can find that there as well. Now, again, thank you so much for listening, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. Until I see you again, happy gaming.